Emma Whitfield pressed her fingernails into her palm until the pain became the only real thing left in the world. The man across the table slid the paper toward her, her parents' land, her last inheritance, everything, and smiled like he was doing her a kindness. "Sign it," her uncle said, "or find somewhere else to sleep tonight." She was 18 years old. She had nowhere to go, and she had exactly one night to decide whether to disappear quietly or fight back the only way she had left. If this story already has your heart beating faster, please subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and follow along until the very last word. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The night Emma Whitfield made the most dangerous decision of her life. The wind outside was bitter enough to cut through walls, and the farmhouse that had never truly felt like home seemed to grow smaller with every passing minute. She sat at the kitchen table, long after the rest of the household had gone to bed, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago, staring at nothing in particular. The lamp beside her threw a weak yellow circle of light across the table, and in that circle sat two things: the unsigned document her uncle had placed in front of her before supper, and a folded piece of newspaper she had been carrying in the pocket of her coat for 11 days. She picked up the newspaper clipping first. She had read it so many times that the fold marks had worn thin and the edges had begun to fray. But she read it again anyway, slowly, the way a person reads something they are trying to memorize before it disappears. Rancher seeking a wife. I offer honest work, a safe home, and respect. James Carter. Silver Ridge, Montana. That was all it said. No poetry, no grand promises, no description of wealth or beauty or future happiness. Just those three things: honest work, a safe home, and respect. Emma set the clipping down and looked at the document beside it. Her uncle's handwriting filled the bottom half of the page, tidy and precise, the way everything about Harold Whitfield was tidy and precise. The language was formal and full of words she had to read twice to understand, but the meaning was plain enough. She would sign over the 12 acres her parents had left her, the only piece of land in the world that carried their name, and in exchange, Harold would allow her to continue living under his roof for another 6 months while she arranged suitable employment. 6 months. Emma had done the arithmetic. 6 months meant another winter of rising before dawn, to start fires and boil water and prepare breakfast for a household that spoke to her only to give her instructions. 6 months meant another season of watching her younger cousins wear new coats while she repaired the same wool dress for the 3rd year running. 6 months meant Harold's wife Margaret looking through her at mealtimes as though she were a piece of furniture that had been moved into an inconvenient location. And at the end of those 6 months, the land would be gone, and Emma would be exactly where she was right now, except with nothing left to bargain with and no road left to walk back on. She pulled the lamp a little closer and looked at the clipping again. Honest work, a safe home, respect. She had grown up hearing that a woman alone could not trust a stranger. Her Aunt Margaret had said it so many times over the years that it had become a kind of prayer repeated at the table and beside the fire, and whenever a woman from town was mentioned who had made a choice that didn't sit right with proper people. A woman alone cannot afford to trust what she cannot see. That was the wisdom Emma had been raised on. That was the fence she was supposed to stay inside. But Emma had also grown up inside this house, and she knew what the fence looked like from the inside. She picked up the pen. She did not sign the document. She folded the newspaper clipping carefully and put it back in her coat pocket. Then she went upstairs quiet as she could manage on the 3rd step that always groaned, and she sat on the edge of her narrow bed and looked around the room she had slept in for 6 years. There was not much to see. A quilt she had sewn herself from scraps. A small wooden box on the windowsill where she kept the 2 photographs she had of her parents. A hook on the back of the door where her coat hung. A single shelf of books that were the only things in this house she had chosen for herself. She began to pack. She took the quilt and the wooden box and 4 books and her spare dress and her mother's silver thimble and a pair of good boots that had been her one extravagance 3 years ago, bought with money she had earned taking in mending from neighbors without telling Harold. She did not take much because she did not have much. But what she packed deliberately, the way a person packs who is not planning to come back. By the time the clock downstairs chimed 2 in the morning, Emma had written a reply to the advertisement in Montana, sealed it in an envelope with the last of her coins pressed flat inside for postage, and set her small suitcase beside the door. She sat down one more time and looked at the unsigned document on the table. Then she left it exactly where Harold had placed it, turned the lamp down, and went to wait for morning. The reply came back in 17 days. She had been checking the mail herself, slipping out to the box at the end of the road before anyone else was awake, and when the envelope arrived with a Montana postmark, her hands shook so badly that she tore the corner opening it. The letter inside was not long. Miss Whitfield, I received your letter, and I want to be honest with you, because I think that is the only fair way to begin. I am 34 years old. I have a cattle ranch in Silver Ridge, Montana, that I have been building for 11 years. I lost my brother 8 years ago, and I have been working this land alone since then. I am not a man who uses a lot of words. I do not know how to write the kind of letter that would make a young woman feel certain. But I can tell you what I said in the advertisement was true. I will not make promises I can't keep. If you decide to come, I will meet you at the station. If you decide not to come, I will understand that too. The choice is yours entirely. James Carter. Emma read it 4 times. Then she read it a 5th time, focusing on one particular sentence. The choice is yours entirely. She could not remember the last time anyone had said that to her. She wrote back the same afternoon. Mr. Carter, I will be on the Thursday train. Emma Whitfield. She did not tell Harold. She did not tell Margaret. She told no one because she had learned that the people in this house had opinions about everything she did, and that their opinions served their own purposes and not hers, and she was done letting other people's purposes shape the direction of her life. On the Wednesday evening, she carried her suitcase downstairs and set it beside the front door and sat at the kitchen table and waited. Harold came downstairs at 7:30 for his evening glass of water. Saw the suitcase, saw Emma sitting straight-backed at the table, and stopped in the doorway. What is this? He said. I'm leaving tomorrow morning, Emma said. I wanted you to know before you found out another way. Harold looked at the suitcase. Then he looked at the unsigned document still sitting on the table where he had left it. His expression went through several changes in quick succession, none of them warm. Where exactly do you think you're going? He said. Montana, Emma said. The silence that followed lasted long enough that the clock on the wall ticked through it 3 full times. Montana, Harold repeated as though the word itself was ridiculous. You don't know anyone in Montana. I know someone now, Emma said. Harold pulled out the chair across from her and sat down with the careful movements of a man who was measuring his words before he spoke them. He folded his hands on the table. He looked at her with the expression she had seen him use in business negotiations, the one that was supposed to communicate reasonableness while accomplishing something else entirely. Emma, he said, I understand you're upset about the land, but you need to think clearly about what you're doing. You're 18 years old. You don't know this man. You have no idea what kind of life you'd be walking into. That's true, Emma said. I don't. Then you understand how dangerous this is. I understand how dangerous this is, Emma agreed. I also understand what's here. Harold's expression shifted slightly. You have a roof over your head, he said. You have family. Emma looked at him for a moment without speaking. Harold, she said finally, her voice very quiet and very even. You want me to sign away my parents' land so that you can sell it. You have wanted that since the week after my mother's funeral. You have been waiting for me to become desperate enough to do it. And I think you were right that I was going to get there eventually, because I have been desperate for a long time. She paused. But I'm not there yet, and I don't intend to be. Harold's face went through another change, this one sharper. That land is more trouble than it's worth, he said. The taxes alone are my responsibility, Emma said. Not yours, mine. You can't pay taxes on land you don't live on from a cattle ranch in Montana with a man you've never met. I don't know that yet, Emma said. Neither do you. Margaret appeared in the doorway in her dressing gown drawn by the voices. She took in the scene, Harold's expression. Emma sitting unmoved, and her eyes went narrow and cool. "You ungrateful child," Margaret said. Emma looked at her aunt. She had been afraid of that voice for 6 years. It had a particular quality, cold and sharp, that made her feel small in a way that she had never been able to armor herself against. But tonight, for some reason, she could not fully explain it, landed differently. "I am grateful," Emma said, and she meant it without irony. "You gave me a roof and food, and I learned things in this house I would not have learned otherwise. I'm grateful for that." She stood up and put her hands flat on the table. "But I am leaving tomorrow morning. The document is on the table where you left it unsigned, and that is where it will stay." She went upstairs. Nobody stopped her. She did not sleep much, but she was not sure she had expected to. The train left at 8:30, and Emma was on the platform at 8 o'clock with her suitcase and her coat, and the small wooden box tucked under her arm. The station master gave her a look that suggested he thought she was making a mistake, but he took her ticket and said nothing, and Emma stood on the platform and watched the train come in, and did not let herself look back at the town. She boarded. The seat was hard, and the car was cold, and the journey was going to take 4 days, with 2 changes, and Emma sat by the window and looked at the land moving past, and felt something she hadn't felt in so long she almost didn't recognize it. Space, not freedom. Yet, she was not foolish enough to call it that, when she didn't know what was waiting at the end but space. Room to breathe. Distance between herself and the voice of every person who had ever told her what she was worth, and found the number to be very small. She unfolded James Carter's letter and read it one more time. "The choice is yours entirely." She folded it again and put it in her pocket and looked out at the planes rolling past in the early morning light, and she made herself a very quiet promise. Whatever she found at the end of this train ride, she was going to face it standing up. The journey was 4 days, and Emma had little to do but think and watch the country change. She had never been west before. She had barely been anywhere before the town she'd grown up in, the surrounding farms. One trip to the city when she was 12, that she still remembered in fragments of noise and crowds, and her mother's hand holding hers tight in the street. Her world had been small, and she had known it was small, but knowing something is small, and then watching it become small in the window of a moving train, are 2 different experiences entirely. The farmland gave way to prairie. The prairie gave way to something wider and stranger, a landscape that felt like it went on past the edge of what a person could properly imagine. The sky out here was enormous in a way that was almost alarming, pressing down on everything, with a weight that was also somehow a relief. She shared the car with a family traveling to visit relatives. 2 older gentlemen who played cards most of the day, and a woman about her mother's age who introduced herself as Mrs. Callahan and asked Emma where she was headed. "Montana," Emma said. "Silver Ridge." "Oh," said Mrs. Callahan, and her face went through a small, polite rearrangement. "That's quite a distance." "Yes, ma'am." "You have family there?" Emma hesitated for only a fraction of a second. "I will," she said. Mrs. Callahan looked at her with the particular expression of an older woman who has understood something. A younger woman hasn't said out loud, and she didn't press further, but she did share her lunch with Emma that afternoon and press a small packet of peppermints into her hand before getting off at her stop, and Emma sat with the peppermints in her lap for a long time after the woman had gone, feeling something warm and precarious at the back of her throat. On the 4th morning, the train pulled into Silver Ridge. Emma had been awake since before dawn, sitting straight in her seat, watching the mountains get closer. She had repinned her hair twice, and checked that her coat was presentable, and told herself 3 times that she was not afraid, and believed herself less each time. When the train finally groaned to a stop, she sat still for a long moment. Around her, the car was coming alive. People gathering coats and bags, voices rising, children being gathered and hushed. The ordinary business of arriving somewhere. Emma watched it all, and then she looked down at her hands in her lap, and she said very quietly to no one in particular, "All right then." She picked up her suitcase. She walked to the door. She stepped down onto the platform. Silver Ridge was not a large town. The platform was a wooden structure that extended along one side of the track, and beyond it, she could see a main street of storefronts and a church spire, and the broad sky above everything, and the mountains in every direction. Closer than they had seemed from the train, so close, she could see the dark lines of trees climbing their lower slopes. The cold hit her immediately. Not the damp gray cold she had grown up with, but something cleaner and more serious. A cold with intention to it, and she pulled her coat tighter and looked along the platform. She had no idea what James Carter looked like. His letter had told her nothing useful about his appearance. She only knew his age and his work, and the careful, plain way he wrote sentences. There were perhaps a dozen people on the platform. She looked at each of them in turn, trying to figure out which one might be waiting for a woman traveling alone from the east. Then a man near the far end of the platform looked up and saw her, and she knew. She knew not, because he was remarkable to look at. He was not, or at least not in the way she would have described if someone had asked her to picture a man from a Montana cattle ranch. He was tall, with the particular kind of lean build that comes from years of physical work, rather than any deliberate effort, and he wore a brown coat that had seen considerable use, and his hat was pushed back slightly on his head, in a way that suggested he was not much concerned with appearances. His face was weathered in the honest way that came from spending days outside in all kinds of weather, and there were lines around his eyes that might have been from squinting at the sun, or might have been from something else. He held his hat in his hands. He was looking at her the way a man looks at something he is not sure he has correctly understood. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he walked toward her, not fast, not slow, just steady and deliberate, and she stood her ground on the platform and watched him come and told herself to breathe. He stopped a few feet away from her. He was quiet for a moment, as if he was working something out. "Miss Whitfield," he said. His voice was low and even, and the Montana air had a way of carrying it. "Mr. Carter," Emma said. Another silence. It was not an uncomfortable silence exactly. It was the silence of two people who have written honestly to each other and are now in the peculiar situation of having to attach all of that honesty to a real face and a real voice and a real cold morning on a real train platform. "How was the journey?" he said. "Long," Emma said. "But I've been in smaller spaces." Something moved across his face that might have been the beginning of a smile. "I expect you have," he said. He looked down at her suitcase. "Is this everything?" he said. "Yes," Emma said. "I travel light." He picked up the suitcase without being asked, which startled her slightly. She was not accustomed to anyone picking things up for her, and he held it in one hand, and with the other he gestured toward the far end of the platform. "I thought you might want somewhere to rest before anything else," he said. "There's a decent inn at the end of the main street. Mrs. Henley runs it. She's a good woman. I can take you there if you'd like, and we can—" He paused. "We can talk if that's what you want. Or you can rest. There's no requirement on how this goes." Emma looked at him. "Mr. Carter," she said carefully, "I have been sitting on a train for 4 days, thinking about this conversation." "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I imagine you have." "I would like to talk," she said, "if that's all right with you." "Yes, ma'am," he said again. They walked off the platform together into the cold Silver Ridge morning, and Emma Whitfield looked at the mountains, and the wide, unpretty street, and the unfamiliar sky, and she breathed the sharpest air she had ever breathed in her life, and she kept walking. They sat in the small dining room of Mrs. Henley's inn, with coffee between them, the morning light coming through the window, and James Carter told her the truth about what she was walking into. "The ranch house needs work," he said. "I've been on my own out there for a long time, and I haven't—" He stopped. "I haven't kept it the way a house ought to be kept. I know that." "How much work?" Emma said. "Considerable," he said. She looked at her coffee. "The cattle do well," he said. "We won't go hungry. But it's a hard life out there, and I won't pretend otherwise. The winters are worse than anything you've probably experienced, and we're a long way from town. If something goes wrong, you're dealing with it yourself before any help can reach you." "I understand," Emma said. "I also want to be clear," he said, And he set his coffee cup down and looked at her directly in a way that made her realize this was the thing he had been building toward. About what I mean by the advertisement. When I said I was looking for a wife, I wasn't. He chose his words carefully. I have a neighbor 2 miles east who advertised for a housekeeper and wrote wife because he thought it sounded better. That's not what I meant. I mean a partner. Someone to build something with. I realize that's a strange thing to offer a woman you've never met. And I realize it's a stranger thing still for a woman to consider. And I don't expect you to have an answer right now. I just want you to know what I'm actually asking. Emma looked at him for a long moment. Mr. Carter, she said. Why didn't you write any of that in the letter? He thought about it. I wasn't sure you'd believe it, he said. From a letter. I thought it might sound better said out loud where you could see my face. Can I see it now? Emma said. He looked startled. Your face, she clarified. When you say it again. He held very still for a moment. Then he said quietly, and without looking away, I want a partner, not a housekeeper, not someone who owes me something, someone to build a life with. Emma looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded once. All right, she said. I can work with that. They were married 2 days later in the small church at the end of Silver Ridge's Main Street. The ceremony was brief, performed by a minister named Reverend Walsh, who had known James for years and who looked at Emma with a kind of careful attention she couldn't quite read. There were no guests, James had not invited any, and Emma had none to invite, and the whole thing lasted perhaps 20 minutes, and when Reverend Walsh said, "You may kiss your bride," James looked at Emma with an expression that asked a question without words, and Emma gave the smallest possible nod, and he pressed his lips to her cheek quickly and lightly and stepped back. Congratulations, Mrs. Carter, Reverend Walsh said. Emma looked down at the ring on her hand, plain silver, not elaborate, just a band, and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, Thank you, Reverend. Outside the church, 3 women from town were passing on the opposite side of the street, and they stopped when they saw Emma and James emerge, and they looked the way people look when they think they're being subtle about it, and they are not. Emma kept her eyes forward, but she heard one of them say clearly enough to carry, That's her then, the mail-order girl. The words hit the back of her neck like cold water. She kept walking. James said nothing, but she noticed his jaw tighten slightly, and then he did something she did not expect. He offered her his arm. She took it. They walked to the wagon that would take them out to the ranch, and Emma sat straight on the bench seat and did not look back at the women on the street. And James clicked to the horses, and they moved forward, and Silver Ridge fell away behind them. The ranch was 2 hours from town. Emma had prepared herself for it to be different from anything she had imagined. She had prepared herself for hard and bare and far from anything. She had not prepared herself for how lonely it would feel. The house stood at the end of a long track through open land, and it was solid enough in its construction she could see that James had built it to last, but it had the feeling of a place that had forgotten what it was for. The front had been repaired at some point, with wood that didn't quite match. The window frames needed painting. The porch held a single chair and a bucket and nothing else. Inside was worse in some ways, and better in others. Better because it was clean. James was not a man who lived in disorder. She could see that, but it was clean, the way a room is clean when no one has ever brought anything personal into it. There were no curtains, no rugs. The kitchen had a good stove and serviceable shelves, but not a single thing on those shelves that wasn't strictly functional. Emma stood in the middle of the kitchen with her suitcase in her hand and looked at the room and breathed. James stood near the door. I told you it needed work, he said. You did, she said. The bedroom upstairs is... He stopped. There's a room downstairs I've been using as a kind of storage. I've cleared it out. You can have that room, or the bedroom. It's up to you. Emma looked at him. Mr. Carter, she said. James, we're married. Yes, ma'am, he said. You don't have to give up your bedroom, she said. That's not practical, and I didn't come this far to be impractical. He looked at her steadily. All right, he said. We'll figure it out. We will, she said. She set her suit gown and opened her coat and hung it on the hook beside the door and looked around the kitchen again with a kind of deliberate assessment. "Tell me about your day," she said. "Your regular day. What time do you wake up, and what happens first?" He blinked. "Why?" he said. "Because if I'm going to be useful," Emma said, "I need to understand how things work before I start changing them." James Carter looked at the 18-year-old girl who had arrived terrified on a train platform 4 days ago, standing in his kitchen with her coat off and her eyes sharp, and something shifted in his expression. "I'm up before light," he said. "The cattle need checking before any weather moves in. There are 43 head right now, 2 in the north pasture that have been giving me trouble." "Show me on a map," Emma said. "I don't have a map," he said. "Then draw me one," she said. He stared at her. Then he went and found a piece of paper and a pencil. And Emma Whitfield Carter sat down at the plain kitchen table in the house that didn't yet feel like a home, and she listened, and she learned, and she began. She had arrived terrified. She had not arrived broken, and that it would turn out made all the difference. The first week was the hardest thing Emma had ever done, and she had done hard things. She had never worked with cattle. She had never been on a horse, not properly, not the way working a ranch required. And the first time James saddled a horse for her, and she attempted to mount it with what she believed was reasonable confidence. The horse moved sideways, and Emma went sideways with it, and only avoided an embarrassing landing, because James caught the bridle at exactly the right moment. "You've ridden before," he said. "Briefly," Emma said from a position that was technically still on the horse. "And some time ago." She could not see his face, but she heard something in the silence that followed that she suspected might be amusement, very carefully controlled. "We can go slower," he said. "We don't need to go slower," Emma said. "Show me again." He showed her again. By the end of the week, she could stay on the horse without anyone holding the bridle, and she counted that as progress and refused to count it as anything less. The work was relentless in a way she had not quite understood from the outside. There was no natural stopping point to a day on a cattle ranch. There was always something else, always the next thing, pressing in behind the last thing, and the cold made all of it harder, because the cold was a constant opponent that had to be managed alongside everything else. Her hands were chapped before the week was out. Her back ached in muscles she hadn't known she had. But she also noticed things. She noticed that James was up before 4 every morning without complaint, moving through the cold dark with the quiet competence of someone who had done this so long it had become a kind of language, and she found herself trying to match that steadiness. She noticed that he never raised his voice at the animals, not even when they were being difficult. She noticed that he had a way of explaining things, how to check the water troughs for ice, how to read the sky for incoming weather, how to tell from the behavior of the cattle whether something was wrong before you could see it yourself. That assumed she was capable of understanding, rather than assuming she wasn't. She noticed that he never once said, "You're doing it wrong." He said, "Here's the other way to try it." These were not small things. She had lived with people who used correction as a form of control, who pointed out failures as a way of reminding you what you owed them. James corrected her the way a person corrects someone whose success they actually want. She kept noticing. In the evenings they sat at the kitchen table, and Emma cooked what she knew how to cook, and James ate without complaint, and sometimes talked, and sometimes didn't. He was not a man who filled silence with noise for its own sake, and Emma found she didn't mind that. She was not accustomed to silence that was comfortable, but she was learning what it felt like. On the 5th evening, James came in from the barn with a small problem, a loose board on the cattle gate that needed replacing. And Emma, who had been going through the shelf of supplies in the back room, found a piece of lumber she thought might work and brought it to him. He looked at it. "That'll do," he said. Emma said, "I can help fix it if you show me." He looked at her for a moment, the way he sometimes did when she said something that seemed to require him to recalibrate. "You want to learn to do carpentry," he said. "I want to learn whatever is useful," Emma said. "I'm going to be living here. I should know how things work." He got her the tools. They fixed the gate board together in the cold blue dusk, and James showed her how to check that the nail had gone in straight, and Emma made one that hadn't, and took it out, and did it again until it had. And by the time they went back inside, her fingers were almost too stiff to move, but she had fixed a gate, and she knew how to fix the next one. "You're stubborn," James said over supper. "Yes," Emma said. I meant it as a compliment, he said. I know, Emma said. I took it as one. Something settled between them after that. Not comfort exactly. They were still two strangers learning the strange geography of each other's presence, but something quieter than the careful politeness of the first days. Something that had room for honesty in it. On Sunday, James drove her into Silver Ridge. There were things they needed from the general store, and Emma had a list she'd been building all week of what was missing from the house, and what could wait and what couldn't. She walked the store with the list, and James walked with her, and she was aware from the moment they came through the door of the attention. It was the particular kind of attention that pretends to be something else. People talked to James as they always had. They greeted him and asked about the cattle and made the ordinary exchanges of a small town on a Sunday morning. But while they talked to James, they looked at Emma, and in their looking, there was an assessment that had nothing polite about it, even when the faces that held it were arranged politely. Mrs. Hargrove, who ran the draper's shop and seemed to consider herself an authority on most matters in Silver Ridge, came into the general store while Emma was examining bolts of fabric for curtain material, and stood 3 feet away and said to her companion in a voice carefully pitched to travel, "She doesn't look like much, does she? I suppose he must have been desperate." Emma's hands on the fabric were very still. The woman's companion murmured something. "Well," Mrs. Hargrove said, "what do you expect a man who has to send off for a wife?" Mrs. Hargrove. James's voice came from behind Emma, and it was quiet in a way that was not quiet at all. Emma turned to see him standing 4 feet away, looking at Mrs. Hargrove with an expression that was entirely neutral, and somehow considerably more effective than anger would have been. "I don't believe I heard you correctly," he said. "Would you like to repeat yourself?" Mrs. Hargrove's face rearranged itself into something that was attempting to look offended, and not quite managing it. "I was simply—" "My wife's name is Emma Carter," James said. "She is a member of this community, and she will be treated as such." He paused, and in the pause the whole store seemed to hold its breath. "I trust I've made myself understood." He looked at Mrs. Hargrove for one more moment. Then he turned back to Emma and said in a completely ordinary tone, "Did you find what you were looking for?" Emma looked at him. "Yes," she said. "I think I have." They rode home with the supplies and the curtain fabric, and a kind of silence between them that was different from the other silences. It had something in it that neither of them named. That evening, Emma hung curtains in the kitchen window. They were plain and slightly uneven, because she had cut them by eye rather than measurement, but they were there, and when she lit the lamp, the light caught them, and the room looked for the first time since she had arrived like a room where someone lived. James came in from the barn and stopped in the doorway. He looked at the curtains. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "That's better." Emma looked at the curtains and then at the room around them, and she thought about the bare house she had arrived at and the week she had just survived, and the man who had said my wife's name is Emma Carter in a general store in Silver Ridge, Montana, as though it was simply a fact of the world that needed stating. "Yes," she said. "It is." Outside the window, the Montana night was cold and enormous and full of stars, and Emma Carter stood in her kitchen with the lamp burning and thought that she had no idea yet what kind of life this would turn out to be. But she thought she might want to find out. The curtains were still there in the morning. Emma had half expected to wake up and find that she had imagined them. Imagined all of it, the train ride and the wedding and the man who had said her name in a general store like it was something worth defending. But the curtains were there catching the gray. Early light, and the kitchen was cold and real. And outside, she could hear James already moving in the barn, and she put her feet on the floor and started another day. That was the thing about ranch life that nobody told you before you arrived. It didn't pause to let you catch up. It simply moved forward at its own pace and expected you to match it. And every morning, you either matched it or you fell behind, and falling behind had consequences that accumulated. Emma did not fall behind. She was up before 5 that second week earlier than James expected her, and when he came in from the morning check of the north pasture, he found the stove already burning and coffee already made, and Emma standing at the kitchen window with a list in her hand. He stopped in the doorway. "You don't have to be up this early," he said. "I know," Emma said. What's in the northwest corner of the property? You mentioned it yesterday, but you didn't finish. He looked at her. Old fence line, he said. Most of it needs replacing. I've been working on it section by section, but it takes time alone. Show me today, Emma said. After the morning work. It's cold out there, Emma. It was cold yesterday, she said, and I was out there anyway. He got his coffee and sat down and looked at his list and said nothing else about it, and Emma took that as agreement, which it was. By the end of the second week, she could tell the difference between cattle that were unsettled because of weather coming in, and cattle that were unsettled because something had spooked them in the night. And she had learned this not from any book, but from standing in the north pasture in the cold, and watching them, and asking James questions until she understood what she was seeing. He never said that's enough questions for today. He answered every one. She also learned that James Carter carried a particular kind of silence around with him that was not unfriendly, but was very much closed. The way a house is closed when someone has shut all the windows against the weather and forgotten to open them again when the weather passed. He talked about the cattle and the fences and the work without hesitation. He talked about Silver Ridge and the surrounding ranches and the history of the land with genuine knowledge. But there were things he moved around rather than through. And Emma noticed this, the way she noticed everything about him quietly, and without comment, cataloging it for later. On the 10th day, she found the photograph. She had been reorganizing the storage room that James had cleared out for her when she arrived. She was using it as a kind of workroom, now a place to mend and sew and keep her books, and behind a loose board at the back of the top shelf, she found a small tin box, and inside the box was a photograph of two boys, one about 14 and one maybe 9 or 10, standing in front of a building she didn't recognize, squinting into the sun. She knew immediately which one was James. Even at 14, there was something in the way he stood, that quality of stillness, the weight forward on both feet, the directness of the gaze even against the light. The younger boy was laughing. Emma looked at the photograph for a long time. She put it back exactly where she had found it, pushed the loose board carefully back into place, and never mentioned it. But she thought about the younger boy's laugh for the rest of the day, and she thought about what James had written in his letter. I lost my brother 8 years ago, and I have been working this land alone since then, and she understood a little better why the house had felt like a place where someone survived rather than a place where someone lived. That evening at supper she said, "What was his name?" James looked up from his plate. He went still in that particular way of his. "Daniel," he said after a moment. Emma nodded. "Did he like it out here?" Another pause. This one longer. "He loved it," James said. "He used to say he could breathe out here in a way he couldn't anywhere else." Emma looked at her plate. "I'm starting to understand what he meant," she said. She heard James set his fork down. She didn't look up. After a moment, he picked it up again, and they finished supper, and neither of them said anything else about it, and that was all right. Sometimes a door opened a crack, and you didn't have to push it all the way. The third week brought the first real test. One of the cattle in the north pasture, a young heifer James had been watching, went down during the night. Emma was up before James heard anything, woken by something she couldn't name. Some change in the sound of the air, and she went to the window and saw nothing. But she pulled on her coat and boots and went out anyway, and that was how she found the heifer. She did not know enough yet to know what was wrong. But she knew the animal was in trouble, and she knew James needed to know, and she ran back to the house and knocked hard on the bedroom door. "James, north pasture, one of them is down." She heard him moving before she finished the sentence. Howe was dressed in under 2 minutes and out the door in 3, and Emma went with him, and together they worked through the next 2 hours in the cold dark. James doing the things he knew how to do, and Emma doing whatever he told her to, and 2 or 3 things he didn't tell her to, but that clearly needed doing. By the time the sky began to lighten in the east, the heifer was standing shaky, but standing, and James sat back on his heels in the hay and breathed. "She'll be all right," he said. Emma nodded. Her hands were stiff with cold, and she had hay in her hair, and she was aware that she was absolutely exhausted, and she felt something underneath the exhaustion that was warmer and more solid than tiredness. "You knew something was wrong before you heard anything," James said. He wasn't looking at her, still watching the heifer. "How?" Emma thought about it. I don't know exactly, she said. Something changed. In the way the night sounded. He looked at her then. Daniel used to say the same thing, he said. He looked away again quickly, as though he hadn't meant to say it. Emma didn't respond, didn't make anything of it, just let it sit there between them in the early morning cold. But something shifted after that. She couldn't have pointed to exactly where or how, but the quality of the space between them changed, became fractionally less like the space between two people, performing a careful arrangement, and more like the space between two people who were actually in the same place. She noticed it in small ways. He started telling her things without waiting for her to ask changes in the weather. He was tracking a problem with the water supply in the east section. A neighbor named Gideon Walsh, who had been encroaching on the southern fence line for 3 years, and who James was going to have to confront before winter. He told her these things at the table, and in the barn, and sometimes in the middle of the field, when they were working, and Emma listened, and asked questions, and offered thoughts, and more than once, James would stop and consider what she said, with the kind of attention that meant he was actually weighing it. She started planting things too. Not outside, yet the ground was too cold for that, but she found seeds in the storage room, some of them old, but still viable, and she started them in small pots on the kitchen window, sill beans and herbs, and one stubborn little tomato plant that had no business surviving and seemed determined to survive anyway. James looked at the pots on the windowsill for 3 mornings without comment. On the 4th morning, he said, "Where did you find those seeds?" "Storage room," Emma said. "Back shelf. Were they someone's?" James was quiet for a moment. "They were Daniel's," he said. "He was going to put in a kitchen garden. The spring after he stopped. He never got to it." Emma looked at the pots. "I can put them back," she said. "No," James said. He looked at the little tomato plant, the one with no business surviving. "No, leave them." That was the moment Emma understood that James Carter was not a man who had forgotten how to feel things. He was a man who had run out of people to feel them with. The 4th week brought trouble of a different kind. Emma had gone into Silver Ridge alone. James had a fence to repair that couldn't wait, and she'd told him she could manage the supply run herself. And after a brief argument that was mostly James listing reasons she shouldn't go alone, and Emma demonstrating that she had already thought of all of them, he'd let her take the wagon. She managed the supply run without difficulty. She was loading the last of the boxes into the wagon when she heard her name. Not Emma, not Mrs. Carter, just her name said in a tone she recognized. Emma Whitfield. She turned. Standing on the boardwalk was a woman she didn't know. Middle-aged and neatly dressed with the particular expression of someone who has been waiting for a specific conversation. "It's Carter now," Emma said. "Of course," the woman said in a way that suggested she disagreed. "I'm Clara Henshaw. My husband Robert owns the land adjacent to the north of your to Carter's ranch." Emma looked at her steadily. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Henshaw." "Are you?" Clara Henshaw said. "I wonder. You see, I think you should know something about the situation you've put yourself in since you came here without anyone to advise you properly." She stepped a little closer. "James Carter is not the straightforward man he appears. He had a woman before you, Eleanor Briggs, daughter of the biggest landowner in the county. She refused him, and there were reasons for that refusal. I think you deserve to know them." Emma held the edge of the wagon box and looked at this woman very carefully. "What reasons?" she said. Clara Henshaw smiled thin and satisfied. "He has a temper," she said. "Eleanor told me herself. When things don't go his way, James Carter is not a man you want to be near." Emma was quiet for a moment. She thought about the man who hadn't laughed when she fell sideways off a horse. The man who said, "Here's another way to try it, instead of you're doing it wrong." The man who had stood in a general store and said, "My wife's name is Emma Carter," in a voice that didn't rise, didn't threaten, just stated a fact, and expected it to land. She thought about 2 weeks of mornings and evenings, and hard cold work of conversations at the kitchen table, and silences that had stopped being uncomfortable. She looked at Clara Henshaw. "Thank you for your concern," Emma said. "Is there anything else?" Clara Henshaw blinked. "I don't think you understand." I understand that you've told me something you believe, Emma said, and I've noted it, but I'll form my own opinions based on my own experience, Mrs. Henshaw, and right now my own experience tells me something different from what you're describing. She picked up the last box and set it in the wagon. Good day. She drove home. She didn't tell James about the conversation that day or the next. She watched him instead, the way she had been watching him from the beginning, looking for the thing Clara Henshaw had described. The temper. The darkness behind the quiet. She didn't find it. What she found was this: when the fence repair took 3 hours longer than expected and came out crooked anyway, because the ground had frozen wrong, James said, "I'll redo it in the spring," and moved on. When a supply order was wrong, and they were short on 2 things he needed, he recalculated and adapted without a word of blame directed at anyone. When Emma made a mistake with the cattle, let one of the gate latches slip so that 2 heifers got into the feed shed. James found the situation, assessed the damage, and said, "Easy to fix. Let me show you the better latch." She watched for a week. Then she told him. She told him at the kitchen table on a Thursday evening straightforwardly, the way she told him things. "A woman named Clara Henshaw stopped me in town last week," she said. "She told me you had a temper, that Eleanor Briggs refused you because of it." James set his coffee cup down. He was still for a long moment. "Clara Henshaw has been trying to buy this land for 6 years, he said. Emma looked at him. "Through Robert Henshaw," she said. "Through Robert Henshaw," James confirmed, "who has made 3 offers, each time slightly below what it's worth, and each time I've said no. Clara wasn't happy about it." "And Eleanor Briggs," Emma said. James was quiet again. This quiet was different from his usual quiet. It had something careful in it, something he was working out. "Eleanor Briggs is the daughter of Martin Briggs," he said, "who owns the largest piece of land in this county. Her father approached me 2 years ago about a possible arrangement. Eleanor and I met twice. She was perfectly pleasant, and I think I probably bored her significantly, and that was the end of it." He paused. There was no temper. There was no refusal. There was just 2 people who didn't suit each other, and one of them had a father who was annoyed about it, and a neighbor who saw an opportunity. Emma looked at him. "You should have told me about the Henshaws," she said. "About them wanting the land." James met her eyes. "Yes," he said. "I should have. I'm sorry." Emma picked up her coffee cup. "If they approach me again," she said, "I'll tell you immediately." "All right," he said. "And James," she said, "the next time there's something I should know about, tell me. I'm not here to be protected from information. I'm here to be your partner. You said so yourself." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're right," he said. "I did say so." "Good," Emma said. "Then act like it." The silence that followed was brief, and then he said with something in his voice she hadn't quite heard before, "You're not afraid of much, are you?" Emma considered this. "I'm afraid of plenty," she said. "I'm just not afraid of the right things anymore." November came in cold, and with purpose. The days shortened dramatically, the light going thin and gray by mid-afternoon, and the work of the ranch changed character. Less about growth and more about preparation, about laying in what was needed before the worst of it arrived. James worked from before dawn until after dark most days, and Emma worked beside him, or ahead of him, or behind him, depending on what needed doing, and they fell into a rhythm that had stopped feeling strange and started feeling like something else. One evening, James came in from a repair on the barn roof and found Emma teaching herself to read a surveying map she had found in the storage room. She had it spread across the kitchen table, and she had a pencil in her hand, and she was making small marks on a piece of paper beside it. "Where did you find that?" he said. "Storage room," she said. "Where I find everything interesting. Is this the Henshaw property line?" She pointed to a boundary marked on the map. James came to look over her shoulder. "Yes," he said. "And this." She pointed to a section that had been marked differently from the rest, with what looked like a recent addition. James went very still. Emma felt the change in him before she turned to look at his face. "James," she said. "What is this?" "That," he said quietly, "is why the Henshaws want this land." He sat down and he told her. The map showed something that Emma, once she understood what she was looking at, could not believe James had been carrying alone. There was a water source, a substantial one underground, that had been assessed by a surveyor 3 years ago at James's request after the property's surface water had been inconsistent during a dry summer. The survey had confirmed it, and the Henshaws somehow had found out about it. Water rights in this county are everything, James said. Whoever controls this source controls access for the surrounding land. Robert Henshaw knows it. He's been trying to get this ranch for years because of it, and he's been patient about it, and I've been saying no, but he found a new angle, Emma said. James looked at her. What do you mean? Emma tapped the map. He sent his wife to spook the new bride, she said. Get her scared enough to pressure you to sell or leave, which would amount to the same thing eventually. She paused. It's actually clever. I'm annoyed that it's clever. James stared at her. You figured that out, he said. It wasn't difficult, Emma said. Once you told me about the water, the rest of it made sense. She looked at the map. James, have you talked to anyone else about this, a lawyer, Reverend Walsh? Walsh knows some of it, James said. I haven't found a lawyer I trust. We need one, Emma said. Before winter closes things down, the Henshaws are going to escalate. James looked at her across the table. We, he said. Not a question. Something else. Emma looked at him steadily. We, she confirmed. This is my land too now. The thing that happened in James Carter's expression when she said that Emma filed it away, somewhere she intended to keep it. They rode to Silver Ridge the next morning and found a lawyer named Patterson who had offices above the hardware store and who turned out to be, if not inspiring, at least honest, and who looked at the surveying map and the water assessment and said what they both already suspected the documentation was. In order, the rights were clear, but that wouldn't necessarily stop the Henshaws from trying every legal avenue available, and some that were less legal. You need to be prepared, Patterson said, for this to get uncomfortable. It's already uncomfortable, Emma said. Patterson looked at her over his reading glasses, in the way lawyers looked at women who said direct things. Mrs. Carter, he said, I mean uncomfortable in a legal and financial sense. I know what you mean, Emma said. I'm saying we're already past comfortable and we're still standing. Document everything from this point on. Every conversation, every approach, every offer. Write it down with the date and the time. Patterson looked at James. James said, Do what she said. On the way home, riding in the cold afternoon, James was quiet for a long time. Then he said, You handled that well. Patterson talks to women like they've just arrived somewhere they don't belong, Emma said. Most men in this county do, James said. I've noticed, Emma said. Another silence. Then James said, Emma, why did you really come here? Not the answer from the letters, the real one. Emma watched the road for a moment. Because my uncle wanted something I owned, she said, and I wasn't willing to give it to him, and staying meant eventually giving in. She paused. And because somebody offered me a choice, and that was the first time anyone had done that in a very long time. James was quiet. That's all it took, he said. A choice. That's all it takes, Emma said. For most people. You'd be surprised what someone will do when they're finally given a choice that's actually theirs. James looked at the road. After a while he said, Daniel used to say that people will surprise you if you just get out of their way and let them. Emma looked at him. He was right, she said. James didn't say anything else, and Emma didn't press, but she saw his jaw work once the way it did when he was holding something down, and she turned her face back to the road and let him hold it. The first real confrontation with Robert Henshaw happened on a Tuesday in the middle of November, and Emma was alone when it happened. James had ridden out to the south fence with 2 of the ranch hands he occasionally hired the fence line that Henshaw had allegedly been encroaching on, and Emma was in the yard splitting wood, which she had learned to do competently, if not elegantly, when she heard a horse, and turned to see Robert Henshaw himself riding up the track. She had not met him before. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s, with the kind of authority that came from having a lot of land, and having had it for a long time, and he rode like a man who expected the ground to feel grateful for the attention. He reined in near the fence and looked at Emma with an expression she had seen before and disliked before, the expression of a man assessing a situation and finding it simpler than he'd anticipated. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "I don't believe we've met. I'm Robert Henshaw." Emma set the axe down and straightened up. "Mr. Henshaw," she said, "James isn't here right now." "I know," Henshaw said. "I actually came to talk to you." Emma waited. "I think," Henshaw said in the measured tone of a man who had used measured tones as weapons for a long time, "that you may not fully understand what you've stepped into out here. This is hard country. James Carter is a stubborn man and a proud one, and he's refused to be practical about certain things. And I'm concerned genuinely that the person who suffers for his pride is going to be you." Emma looked up at him. "That's kind of you to worry," she said. "I'd like to make you an offer," Henshaw said. "A private one between us. My figure is fair, considerably fairer than what the land would fetch on the open market given the particular circumstances. I'm prepared to be generous. All you'd have to do is help your husband see reason." Emma looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the words, "help your husband see reason." She thought about what those words actually meant, translated honestly. She thought about what this man had sent his wife to do in town, the story about a temper, the careful poisoning of a marriage he wanted to destabilize. "Mr. Henshaw," she said, "I want to make sure I understand what you're asking me. You want me to convince my husband to sell land that has been his for 11 years. Land with water rights that you know are valuable, and that he knows you know are valuable land, that your wife has already tried to get by coming to me in town with a story about his temper." She paused. "Did I miss anything?" Henshaw's expression shifted very slightly. "Mrs. Carter, you came here thinking I was a young woman who didn't know what she'd married into," Emma said. "And you're right that I've only been here a few weeks. But I know exactly what I married into, Mr. Henshaw. And I know what this land is worth. And I know what you've been doing." She bent down and picked up the axe. "This isn't a conversation I'm going to have. Good day." Henshaw looked at her from his horse. Something moved in his face that was not anger, but was the cousin of anger. Something cold and recalculating. "You might want to think carefully," he said, "about making an enemy in this county." "I'll consider it," Emma said, and turned back to the wood. She heard him ride away. Her hands were shaking, not from fear exactly, but from the effort of standing still and speaking calmly when everything inside her wanted to shout. She brought the axe down on a log with more force than strictly necessary and felt slightly better. When James came back that evening and she told him, he sat across from her at the kitchen table and he was quiet for a full 30 seconds. "He came here alone," he said, "while I was out." "Yes," Emma said. "He thought—" James stopped. "He thought a young woman alone could be managed," Emma said. "He was wrong." James looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "What exactly did you say to him?" Emma told him. When she finished, James sat back in his chair and let out a breath that was not quite a laugh, but had something in common with one. "Emma," he said. "I know," she said. "I may have made things harder." "No," he said. "That's not—" He stopped again, and she saw him working to find the right words, which was always an effort for him, and she waited. "You stood on my land, and you told the truth to a man who has been trying to take it for years, and no one has ever done that before. Not like that." He looked at the table. "I should have been here." "You didn't know he was coming," Emma said. "And James, I'm here. I live here. I need to be able to handle things when you're not." He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "You do." A pause. "You can." Emma looked down at her hands on the table. "Write down what Henshaw said," she said. "Tonight. All of it, date and time. Patterson said to document everything." "Already thought of it," but James said. "Good," Emma said. They sat there in the kitchen for a moment, the two of them with the lamp burning and the night pressing against the windows, and Emma felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. The particular quiet of standing on ground she didn't have to defend from the inside. Outside the temperature was dropping, and the worst of winter had not yet begun. The temperature dropped 12 degrees overnight, and Emma felt it before she opened her eyes. She lay still for a moment in the dark, listening. The house made different sounds. In deep cold, the walls contracted, the floorboards tightened, and there was a particular silence outside that only happened when snow was coming. She had learned to read it in the weeks since November had settled, in the way she had learned to read a dozen other things about this place that she hadn't known existed before she arrived. She got up. James was already in the kitchen when she came downstairs, standing at the window with his coffee looking north. "How bad?" Emma said. "Bad enough," he said. "We need to move the cattle in the north pasture before noon. The shelter out there won't hold if it comes in hard." "I'll get dressed," Emma said. "Emma." "I'll get dressed," she said again, and went back upstairs. They worked through the morning in the kind of cold that made breathing feel deliberate, and by the time the first snow started falling, thin and sharp, more ice than snow, they had moved 38 of the 43 cattle to the main shelter. The remaining 5 were in the far north pasture, and James rode out to get them while Emma stayed to secure the shelter doors. She was working on the second door when she heard the horse come back too fast. She turned. James was riding hard, his face tight, and behind him the 5 cattle were moving at a trot that told her something had already frightened them. "Fence is down in the northwest corner," he said, pulling up. 3 sections. Somebody cut it." Emma stared at him. "Cut it," she said. Not a question. "Clean cuts," James said. "Not breakage. Somebody was out there last night with tools." Emma thought about Robert Henshaw. She thought about the look on his face when she had turned her back on him 3 weeks ago, that cold, recalculating expression. "The cattle," she said. "All accounted for," James said. "But if the storm comes in before I can get those sections fixed—" "Then we fix them now," Emma said. "What do we need?" They rode out together with wire and tools in the saddlebags, and Emma held the fence posts while James worked, her hands going numb inside her gloves, the snow coming harder now. And she did not complain, and he did not suggest she should go back to the house, because they were past that particular conversation, had been past it for weeks. It took 2 hours. By the time they rode back in, the storm had made up its mind, and Silver Ridge had disappeared behind a white wall to the north, and Emma's face was so cold she could barely feel her jaw. Inside, she stood over the stove and pressed her hands around a mug, and watched James write down the fence damage in the record book she had started for him in October. Date, location, nature of the damage. 3 posts cut cleanly with wire cutters in the northwest corner of the Carter property. Storm incoming. "Patterson needs to know," Emma said. "First thing tomorrow," James said. "Tonight," Emma said. "Write the letter tonight. If Henshaw is escalating—" "I know," James said. He didn't look up from the book. "I'll write it." Emma looked at him. "You're angry," she said. "Yes," he said. "Good," she said. "Stay angry. Just don't let it make you do something that gives him an advantage." James set the pen down and looked at her. He said, "How did you learn to think like that?" Emma wrapped both hands tighter around the mug. 6 years with Harold," she said. "He was never going to fight you straight on. He'd find the angle, find the leverage, find the thing that made you make a mistake." She paused. "Henshaw is the same type." James was quiet. "Your uncle," he said. "Did he ever get the land?" "No," Emma said. "He didn't." James looked at her for a long moment, and then he picked up the pen and wrote the letter to Patterson. December arrived, and the Henshaw problem did not go away, but it changed shape. The direct approach had failed. Robert Henshaw was methodical enough to understand that Emma was not going to be frightened or flattered into cooperation, and so the pressure became indirect, the way pressure from that kind of man always eventually became indirect. It started with the town. Emma noticed it first in the way conversations shifted when she approached. Not dramatically, these were people who had grown up in the same small community, and who were practiced at the particular social geometry of a place where you had to live alongside your enemies as well as your friends. But there was a change, a slight cooling, a tendency for certain people to finish their business and move on when Emma arrived at the general store or the post office. Mrs. Hargrove, who had already announced herself as an opponent in the first week, had clearly found a new topic. Emma heard it in fragments, the way you hear things in a small town when people forget that sound carries. Too young. Doesn't know the land. James will regret it before spring. And she turned away Robert Henshaw on her own doorstep. Who does she think she is? And the one that stung in a specific and particular way. She's not from here. She doesn't understand how things work. Emma wrote all of it down in her own record book. Not the ranch record book, but a personal one, the kind she had kept since she was 13. Which was when she had first understood that her own memory of events was the only reliable record she was going to have. She did not tell James about most of it. Not because she was hiding it, but because she was choosing what to use her energy on, and fighting battles that were being fought with whispers required a different strategy than fighting battles that were being fought with wire cutters. One afternoon in early December, she went into the general store and found herself standing at the counter at the same time as Nora Walsh, the Reverend's wife, who had been kind on the day of the wedding, in the way people are kind when they're slightly worried about something but want to be decent anyway. Nora Walsh looked at her and said quietly, "How are you getting on out there, Mrs. Carter?" Emma looked at her and made a decision. "Well enough," she said. "Though I'd appreciate your honest opinion on something." Nora looked slightly startled. "The talk about me in this town," Emma said, keeping her voice low and even. "I hear some of it. I don't hear all of it, I'm sure. Is there anything I should know that would help me understand what I'm actually dealing with?" Nora Walsh was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're dealing with Robert Henshaw's money and 30 years of people owing him favors. That's mostly what you're dealing with." "What does he tell people about us?" Emma said. "That James is sitting on land and water rights that the community could benefit from if they were in more cooperative hands," Nora said. "That you came here as a stranger and turned James stubborn against the kind of arrangement that would benefit everyone." She paused. "I don't believe it, but there are people who do, or who believe it because it's easier than disagreeing with Robert Henshaw." Emma absorbed this. "Thank you," she said. "That's more useful than most things I've heard in a month." Nora looked at her with the careful attention of a woman who is revising an estimate she made of someone. "You're not what I expected," Nora said. "What did you expect?" Emma said. "Someone who would be gone by December," Nora said honestly. Emma looked at the counter. "It's December," she said. "I'm still here." Nora Walsh smiled. "Yes," she said. "You are." She became Emma's first genuine ally in Silver Ridge, and it happened the way most genuine things happened, not through a grand gesture, but through an accumulation of small ones. Nora started stopping by the ranch on her way to visiting the outlying families she helped her husband serve. She brought things preserves a recipe Emma had asked about once, a book she thought Emma might like, and she sat at the kitchen table and talked, not about Henshaw or the town's politics, but about ordinary things, and her presence changed the quality of Emma's days in a way that Emma hadn't realized she was missing. James watched the friendship develop with the slightly puzzled expression of a man who has lived alone long enough that the appearance of a social life in his own kitchen was genuinely surprising. "Nora Walsh has been here 3 times this week," he said one evening. "She's my friend," Emma said. James considered this. "All right," he said in the tone of a man noting a new feature of his landscape. The real crisis arrived on a Wednesday morning in the second week of December. Emma was in the yard when she saw the rider coming from the direction of town, moving at a pace that suggested news rather than a social call. She waited, and when the rider got close enough, she recognized him as one of the young men who helped at the livery stable. He pulled up and handed her a folded paper. "Letter from Patterson," he said. "He said it was urgent." Emma opened it. She read it twice. Then she went inside and found James. He was repairing a harness at the kitchen table, and he looked up when he heard her come in, and then he looked again more carefully because her face had changed. "What happened?" he said. "Robert Henshaw has filed a legal claim." "Robert Henshaw has filed a legal claim," Emma said. "He's contesting the water rights." James set the harness down very carefully. "On what grounds?" he said. "He's found a surveying record from 18 years ago," Emma said. "Before you bought the land. His lawyer is arguing that the underground water source was assessed as part of the adjacent property. His property in that original survey, and that the later assessment you commissioned was—" She looked at the letter again, "conducted without proper notification to adjacent landowners, which he claims invalidates it under county law. The silence in the kitchen was very loud. James stood up slowly. "That survey from 18 years ago," he said. "That was conducted by Martin Briggs." Emma looked at him. "Eleanor Briggs's father," she said. "Eleanor Briggs's father," James confirmed. "Who has been friends with Robert Henshaw for 30 years. Emma looked at the letter. "Patterson says we need to come in immediately," she said. "He thinks there's a way to fight it, but it requires documentation we may not have." She looked up. "James, do you have the original land deed, the one from when you bought the property?" "In the tin box in the storage room," he said, already moving. Emma was right behind him. The tin box was on the shelf where she had found Daniel's photograph 2 months ago. James lifted it down and opened it on the table in the storage room, and they went through its contents together. James reading, Emma reading, alongside their heads close together over the papers in the cold, small room. The land deed was there. The original water assessment was there. And at the bottom of the box, folded into quarters and slightly water-stained along one edge, was a document Emma had never seen. She unfolded it carefully. "What is this?" she said. James looked at it. His face went through something she had never seen on it before. "That," he said slowly, "is a letter from Martin Briggs to the previous owner of this land, written the year before I bought it." Emma read it. The letter was brief and direct in the way of men who wrote business letters in that era, formal on the surface, unmistakable in its meaning. Martin Briggs, on behalf of himself and Robert Henshaw, had approached the previous landowner with an offer for the property. The offer had been refused. The letter acknowledged the refusal and noted in its final paragraph the existence of the underground water source as the primary reason for their interest. "He knew about the water before you bought the land," Emma said. "Yes," James said. "Which means his 18-year-old survey wasn't about establishing his property's water rights," Emma said. "It was about trying to claim yours." James looked at the letter in her hands. "If I'd found that when I bought the place," he said, "I would have—" He stopped. "You didn't know what you were looking at," Emma said. "Most people wouldn't." She looked at the letter again. "Patterson needs to see this today." James was already putting his coat on. They rode to Silver Ridge in the early afternoon, and Patterson looked at the Briggs letter for a long time without speaking, which Emma had learned was his version of significant emotion. Then he said, "Where did you find this original deed box?" James said. "He's had this for 11 years, Emma said, and didn't know what it was. Patterson set the letter down. "This changes things considerably," he said. "How considerably?" Emma said. "Considerably enough that Henshaw's lawyer is going to have a very uncomfortable morning when I present it," Patterson said. He looked at Emma. "You found this." "We found it," Emma said. "Together." Patterson looked at James. "Your wife," he said, "has a very useful mind, Carter." "I know," James said. Emma looked at the letter on Patterson's desk. "What happens next?" she said. "I file a counter-response to Henshaw's claim by Friday," Patterson said. "With this letter as the primary exhibit. It demonstrates prior knowledge and establishes a pattern of attempted acquisition that undermines his current legal argument." He paused. "I won't promise it ends here. Henshaw has money and he has patience. But this is a significant blow." They rode home in the late afternoon, and the sky above the mountains was the particular deep blue of winter late light, and James was quiet the way he was quiet when he was thinking hard. "Emma," he said when they were halfway home. "Yes," she said. "When you were in the storage room," he said. 2 months ago when you were organizing. Did you find the photograph?" Emma looked straight ahead. "Yes," she said. "I put it back." James was quiet for a moment. "It was Daniel," he said. "I know," she said. "You can tell, even at that age." Another silence. "He would have liked you," James said. Emma felt something pressed against the back of her throat. "Tell me something about him," she said. "Something that isn't sad." James thought about it. "He could whistle any bird call you could name," he said. "Exactly right. You could close your eyes and not know the difference. He learned it one summer. I don't know how he just kept doing it until he got it right, and then he could do all of them. A pause. He used to do it in the mornings, before I was up. I'd hear the mockingbird from outside, and I'd think there was an actual mockingbird, and then I'd remember. Emma listened. He sounds like he was stubborn, she said. Impossibly stubborn, James said. It drove me out of my mind. Funny how that works, Emma said. James looked at her. And then for the first time since Emma had arrived in Montana, James Carter laughed a real laugh, not the careful, almost smile she had seen before, but something that came up from somewhere genuine and surprised them both. Emma looked at him. She had not known his face could do that. She thought it was probably one of the most important things she had seen since she'd arrived. The legal response was filed on Friday, and by the following Monday, Silver Ridge knew about it. Small towns having their own intelligence networks that operated faster than any formal system, and the effect was interesting. Patterson had told them to expect Henshaw to respond badly, and he was right. But the way he responded badly was not what Emma had anticipated. Instead of escalating the legal fight immediately, Henshaw went quiet. The whispers in town changed character. The pressure that had been steady and low became intermittent and uncertain. The way pressure changes when the person applying it is recalculating. Nora Walsh came by on Tuesday. People are talking differently, she said at the kitchen table with her hands around her coffee. Good or bad, Emma said. Complicated, Nora said. There's a group who think Henshaw went too far using a survey from Martin Briggs to challenge a deed that's been clean for 11 years. And there are people who didn't know about the water and are now very interested in which way this goes. She looked at Emma. You have more support than you did last month. I won't say it's a majority, but it's something. I'll take something, Emma said. But the quiet from Henshaw lasted only 10 days. On a Thursday evening, a man Emma didn't know appeared at the ranch gate and said he had a message for James Carter. James went out and talked to him for 5 minutes and came back inside with an expression Emma had not seen before. Not angry, not worried, but something carefully neutral that sat on top of something else entirely. What was that? Emma said. James sat down at the table. Henshaw wants to meet, he said. Just him and me, in town, Saturday morning. Emma looked at him. No, she said. James raised an eyebrow. No, he said. Not just you and him, Emma said. You go alone, there's no witness. Whatever he says, whatever he offers or threatens, it's your word against his. She paused. I go with you. Emma. I go with you, she said. Or we send Patterson and nobody goes. James looked at her for a long moment. He's not going to like that, he said. Good, Emma said. They went together on Saturday morning. Henshaw was waiting in the back room of the Silver Ridge Bank, which was itself a statement. His territory, his terms, the particular authority of a man who sat in rooms other people had to enter. He looked at Emma when they walked in, and his expression went through something quick and controlled. I said I wanted to talk to Carter, Henshaw said. You said you wanted to meet with my husband, Emma said, pulling out a chair. He's here, so am I. You can say whatever you came to say. Henshaw looked at James. James looked back at him steady and unhurried. All right, Henshaw said, and he sat down. The offer he made was not small. Emma had to give him that. He was not a man who negotiated from a position of smallness. He put a figure on the table that was genuinely large enough to rebuild the ranch operation twice over, enough to leave Montana and start somewhere else entirely. He presented it in measured, reasonable language, the language of a man who wants to appear as though he's doing someone a favor. The water rights are going to be tied up in court for 2 years, Henshaw said. Minimum. That's 2 years of legal fees, 2 years of uncertainty, 2 years of fighting a battle that is, he paused, not guaranteed. He spread his hands on the table in a gesture of openness. I'm offering you a clean exit, a fair price, a chance to start over somewhere without all of this weighing on you. James looked at the table. Emma watched his face. She had learned in the months since she'd arrived to read him the way she read the cattle and the weather by pattern, by the small indicators that preceded the larger thing. And what she saw right now was a man who was tired. Not broken, not uncertain, but tired in the specific way of someone who had been fighting alone for a very long time and was being offered a door. Her chest tightened. She did not speak. This was James's moment, and she knew it, and she held herself still. James looked up at Henshaw. "I built this land," James said. "I built it myself. My brother is buried on the east slope, and I have been working every acre of it for 11 years, and I know every fence line and every watercourse and every difficult piece of it, and I am not selling it to you." Henshaw held his gaze. "Carter, my wife told you no when you came to our home," James said. "I am telling you no now in your space so that you can't say I was confused or pressured or didn't understand the offer." He stood up. "The answer is no. The answer will be no in 2 years when the court case is finished. Is there anything else?" Henshaw looked at Emma. Emma looked back at him. "I think you have your answer," she said. Outside the bank, in the cold. Saturday morning. James stood on the boardwalk for a moment, and Emma stood beside him. "Are you all right?" she said. "Yes," he said. "Then, he's not finished." "I know," Emma said. "This is going to get harder before it gets easier." "I know that too," she said. James looked at the street at the ordinary Saturday business of Silver Ridge moving around them. "Emma," he said, "why didn't you say anything in there, when he made the offer?" "Because it wasn't my decision," she said. He looked at her. "It's your land too," he said. "You said so yourself." "It is," she said. "And I would have said no to the exact same offer. But I needed you to be the one to say it. You needed to be the one to say it." She paused. "Some things have to come from you." James was quiet. "You're going to have to explain to me someday," he said, "how you know which things are which." "Someday," Emma agreed. The storm that had been building since the beginning of December finally arrived on the night of the 17th. Emma knew it was coming before she went to bed. She had learned to read the sky in the months since she'd arrived, learned to read it the way James did, as a language rather than scenery, and she made sure everything that needed securing was secured, and everything that needed to be inside was inside, and she went to sleep early in preparation for a hard day. She woke at 3 in the morning to James standing at the bedroom door. "The cattle shelter in the north," he said. "The roof is making noise I don't like." Emma was up before he finished the sentence. Outside, the snow was horizontal, driven by a wind that hit her like a wall when she stepped off the porch, and she understood immediately that this was a different category of storm from anything she had experienced since arriving. "Stay here," James said. "I mean it this time." "How bad is the shelter?" Emma said. "I don't know yet. That's why I'm going." "James." "Emma." He turned and looked at her in the dark, and she saw something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not fear exactly, but the face of someone who has calculated a risk and doesn't want the calculation to include her. "There are 43 cattle in that shelter. If the roof goes, I have to get them out before it comes down. That is not work I can do while worrying about you." Emma stopped. She stood in the howling dark, and she understood what he was actually saying, which was not, "Stay home, because you can't handle it," but "Stay home, because I cannot function if I'm afraid for you." "All right," she said. He went. Emma went back inside and stood at the window and counted. 1 hour passed. The wind got worse. It got worse in a way that was not gradual, but sudden, a step up in intensity that rattled the window frame and made the whole house creak and groan in a way that was alarming even from inside. 2 hours passed. Emma made coffee and then didn't drink it and stood at the window with it going cold in her hands. James had said he would be back before the worst of it. The worst of it was here. She picked up the rope from the hook beside the door. James had put it there on her first week, showed her how to use it as a guideline in a whiteout, so you didn't lose direction, and she stood with it in her hands, and she thought about what James had said. "I cannot function if I'm afraid for you." She thought about the 43 cattle. She thought about the shelter roof. She thought about a man who had been alone on this land for 8 years and who had ridden out into a Montana blizzard by himself, because that was what he had always done, because there had never been anyone to do it with him. Emma tied the rope around her waist, secured the other end to the porch post, and walked into the storm. The cold was not like cold she had experienced before. It was not a temperature. It was a presence, something physical and intentional, and the wind drove ice crystals against her face hard enough to sting, and then to go past stinging into something that felt like burning. She kept the rope in her left hand and moved forward into the white dark. She almost missed him. She would have missed him. The storm had eaten all the distance, collapsed the world to a few feet in any direction. But she heard something. A sound that was wrong against the wind, and she turned toward it and nearly tripped over him. James was on the ground 10 feet from the shelter. How was conscious? She knew that immediately because he said her name, or tried to the word, swallowed by the wind, but he was not getting up, and when she got her hands on him, she understood why. He had one hand pressed to his side and the other gripping the shelter post, and when she pulled his hand away, she felt the wet warmth even through her gloves. "The beam," he said. "Part of the roof. I got the cattle out, but—" "Stop talking," Emma said. "Emma, stop talking," she said again, "and help me get you up." She got him up. She got him up and got his arm across her shoulders, and she turned them both toward the rope line, which was the only thing she could follow in the white dark, and she walked. Later she would not be able to fully account for how they made it back. She remembered the rope in her hand, and James's weight against her side, and the wind trying constantly to turn them sideways, and she remembered talking, not stopping, keeping her voice steady and even, telling James to keep moving. Keep moving. "You're all right, we're almost there." And she remembered thinking that she could not stop, because if she stopped, neither of them would start again. They made it to the porch. She got him inside, and got him to the kitchen table, and got his coat off, and saw the wound, a gash along his ribs where the beam had caught him deep enough to bleed seriously, but not. She told herself this with a firmness that did not leave room for any other conclusion, not deep enough to be the worst thing. She had watched James clean and dress wounds on the cattle. She had paid attention the way she paid attention to everything, because she had understood from the first week that this was a place where knowing things was the difference between managing and not managing. She cleaned the wound. She dressed it. She did these things with hands that did not shake until after she was done, and then she let them shake for about 30 seconds and stopped. James watched her from the kitchen table. "You came after me," he said. "Yes," Emma said. She was tying the last of the bandage. "I told you to stay." "You did," she said. "And you came back in one piece mostly, so I'd call it about even." James looked at her. His face in the lamplight was pale from blood loss and cold, and the particular exhaustion of a man who had just been through something that had cost him, and he looked at Emma, who was sitting across from him, with her hands finally still, and her hair plastered to her face from the snow, and her coat still soaked through, and he said something that was not quite any of the things he might have said. "I was afraid for you," he said. Emma looked at him. "I know," she said. "I was afraid for you too." They looked at each other across the kitchen table in the small hours of a Montana blizzard. "The cattle," Emma said. "All 43, he said. "I got them to the east shelter before the roof went. They're all right." Emma nodded. She became aware sitting there that something had changed in the room. Not dramatically, there was no grand announcement of it, but the quality of the air between them was different from any air they had breathed together before, and she thought it was probably the kind of change that once it happened, you couldn't go back behind. Outside, the storm hammered and tore at the house that James Carter had built to last. Inside, Emma kept watch until dawn, and James slept in the kitchen chair, rather than climb the stairs, and the lamp burned steady between them and Silver Ridge and the Henshaws and the court case, and everything else that pressed at them from the outside fell away. And there were just the two of them, and the storm, and the fact that they had walked out of it together. When the light finally came gray and thin through the curtains, Emma had hung in that first week. James woke and looked at her, and she looked back at him, and he said, "Thank you." Emma stood up and went to put the kettle on. "We need to check the east shelter as soon as it's light enough," she said, "and the northwest fence." "Emma," he said. She turned. "Thank you," he said again, and this time it meant something larger than gratitude for a wound dressed or a storm survived, and they both knew it, and Emma looked at him for a long moment and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the morning hadn't already said. She turned back to the stove. Outside, the storm was finally breaking, and inside the kitchen, that had once been the emptiest place Emma had ever seen, the kettle began to sing. The morning after the storm. Silver Ridge looked like a town that had been picked up and shaken. Emma knew this, not because she went into town, but because Nora Walsh came out to the ranch 2 days later when the roads were passable again, and told her. 3 buildings on the main street had taken damage. The church steeple had lost its upper section. 2 families on the eastern edge of the county had lost outbuildings entirely, and one of them, a young couple named Garrett, with 2 small children, had lost their barn roof and most of their winter feed with it. Emma listened to all of this at the kitchen table, while James sat beside her with his ribs wrapped and his face carrying the particular expression of a man who was trying not to show how much moving hurt. "The Garretts," Emma said. "How bad? Bad enough," Nora said. "They've got the children in the house and the animals in whatever space they can find, but they can't keep that up through the rest of winter. Thomas Garrett is too proud to ask for help, and Sarah is too exhausted to make him." Emma looked at James. James looked back at her. "We have the lumber," he said. "From the east fence repair. There's more than we used." "I know," Emma said. "I was thinking the same thing." Nora looked between them. "You just came through a storm that put James in a bandage," she said carefully. "James's ribs are cracked, not broken," Emma said. "He can supervise. I can lift things." "Emma," James started. "You can supervise," she said again, with the tone that meant the conversation was settled. Nora Walsh looked at Emma Carter with an expression that had moved well past revised estimate and into something closer to genuine admiration. "I'll get the word out," Nora said. "There are 2 other men who'll come if they know Carter is organizing it." "Tell them Saturday," Emma said. "That gives us 2 days to get the lumber out there." James said nothing, which was his way of agreeing with things he hadn't quite caught up to yet. They went to the Garrett place on Saturday with lumber and tools, and the 2 men Nora had recruited, a quiet rancher named Aldous Pike, and a younger man called Ben Reeves, who had grown up 3 miles south of town, and who looked at Emma when she showed up with a tool belt around her waist, with an expression she recognized from her earliest days on the Carter Ranch, the expression of someone recalibrating. Thomas Garrett met them at the gate. How was a lean, weathered man in his 30s who carried the specific dignity of someone who was deeply uncomfortable with what was happening and was determined not to show it. "Carter," he said. "You didn't have to." "I know," James said. "But we're here." Thomas Garrett looked at his boots for a moment. Then he looked up and nodded once, and that was the end of that. They worked through Saturday and into Sunday, and Emma worked beside the men without apology or explanation, and by the second day, neither Aldous Pike nor Ben Reeves was looking at her with recalibration. Anymore, they were just working alongside her, the way people work alongside someone who has proven they're there for the right reasons. Sarah Garrett came out on Sunday afternoon while Emma was helping fit the last section of roof frame, and she stood below and looked up. "Mrs. Carter," she said. Emma looked down. "You don't have to keep calling me that," Emma said. "It's Emma." Sarah Garrett looked at her with eyes that were red-rimmed from 2 weeks of exhausted worry, and she said, "My children are going to have a warm barn because of you." Emma looked at the roof frame. "We all needed it done," she said. "Hand me that board." On the ride home, James was quiet in the way he was quiet when something was working its way through him. "What?" Emma said. "Nothing," he said. "James." He was quiet for another quarter mile. "When I first put that advertisement in the paper," he said, "I told myself I was looking for someone practical, someone who could help with the work, someone sensible." He paused. "I didn't think about this part." "What part?" Emma said. "The part where I'd be sitting here thinking I don't deserve you," he said. Emma turned to look at him. Howe was watching the road, his jaw set, and she could see that it had cost him something to say. And she sat with it for a moment before she spoke. "James Carter," she said, "you built a home out of raw land. You kept every promise you made in 2 letters and a church. You stood in a general store and said my name like it meant something when you didn't have to. She paused. "Don't tell me what you don't deserve." James was quiet. "All right," he said finally. "All right," Emma agreed. They rode the rest of the way home, in the kind of silence that had nothing uncomfortable left in it. January came in hard, and the court case with Henshaw moved at the pace of legal proceedings everywhere, which was to say slowly and with no particular regard for the emotional cost to the people involved. Patterson sent updates that were cautiously optimistic and carefully worded, and Emma read them and filed them and kept her own record and tried not to count the days. What she did instead was teach. It started with the Garrett children. Sarah had mentioned on the Sunday they finished the barn roof that her two eldest weren't getting to school regularly because the road was too difficult in winter, and Thomas couldn't always spare the time to take them. Emma had said without quite planning to, that she could come by twice a week if that was useful, and Sarah had looked at her with such immediate and overwhelming gratitude that Emma had understood this was not a small thing. So on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, Emma rode to the Garrett place and sat at Sarah's kitchen table with 8-year-old Clara and 6-year-old William, and taught them reading and arithmetic and whatever else they were curious about, which turned out to be quite a lot. Clara Garrett was the kind of child who asked questions, the way a terrier worries a bone completely and without giving up, and Emma found that she loved it, loved the way a child's mind moved before anyone had taught it to move carefully. William was quieter, more observant, and he reminded her in a specific and tender way of the younger boy in the photograph in the tin box. Word got around the way everything got around in Silver Ridge. By February, Emma was teaching 4 children, and by March it was 7, and she had moved the lessons to the church hall on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons because Sarah Garrett's kitchen table was no longer large enough. Reverend Walsh offered the space without being asked, which was itself a statement about how the town's opinion of Emma Carter was changing, shifting in the slow and permanent way that opinion in a small community shifts when someone proves themselves over time. Not everyone shifted. Mrs. Hargrove did not shift. She found new things to disapprove of. Emma's teaching was irregular, uncertified, potentially giving children ideas above their station, and she said so to anyone who would listen. Fewer people listened as the months went on, but she kept saying it. And Robert Henshaw did not shift. Henshaw was patient in the way of men who have resources and time on their side, and he had been quiet since the bank meeting in December. Quiet in the way a current is quiet when it's moving underground. Patterson warned them about this. Quiet from Henshaw, Patterson said in his office in March, is not the same as finished from Henshaw. "We know," Emma said. "He's waiting for something," Patterson said. "I don't know what yet." "We'll find out," Emma said. James looked at Patterson. "How's the case?" he said. "Strong," Patterson said. "The Briggs letter is the cornerstone and it's solid. But Henshaw's lawyer is methodical. He's going through every document, every survey, every recorded transaction related to the property going back 30 years. He's looking for a crack." "There isn't one," James said. "There usually isn't," Patterson said, "until there is." He looked at them both. "I want you to go through everything you have. Everything. I want to know what's in that tin box and every other box in that storage room. If there's something that can be used against you, I need to find it before he does." Emma and James spent 3 evenings going through the storage room together, which was the most time they had spent in that small space since Emma had reorganized it in October, and there was something particular about doing it together now versus those early weeks when everything between them had been careful and tentative. James handed her things, and she looked at them and sometimes asked questions, and sometimes just set them in one pile or another, and they worked with the easy efficiency of people who had learned each other's rhythms. They found nothing damaging. They also found at the bottom of the second box a small package wrapped in cloth that James picked up and held for a moment without opening. Emma watched him. "Daniels," he said. She waited. He unwrapped it. Inside was a pocket compass, brass, worn from use. James held it in his palm and looked at it and didn't say anything for a long time. Emma said, "He gave it to you." "He said I always knew where I was going," James said. "He said he needed it more than I did." His hand closed around it. "I found it in his coat after. I put it away and didn't look at it again." Emma sat very still. "James," she said quietly. "What happened to him?" James was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "Fever," he said. "It came fast, and it was bad from the beginning, and there was nothing." He stopped. "The nearest doctor was 2 days' ride. I sent for him. He didn't make it in time." His jaw worked. "I've thought every day since about whether I sent for him fast enough. Whether I waited a day too long because Daniel kept saying he was fine, and I believed him because I wanted to." Emma looked at him. This was the thing she understood. This was the weight that had been in the house when she arrived, heavier than loneliness, heavier than grief. This specific and corrosive question that he had been carrying for 8 years without anyone to put it down with. "James," she said, "listen to me." He looked at her. "You sent for the doctor," she said. "You made the right decision. The outcome was not in your control, and it was not your fault." She held his gaze. "You have to let that question go, not for my sake, for Daniel's. Because if he's anywhere and he can see you, the last thing he wants is for you to still be answering for something that was never your crime." James looked at the compass in his hand. After a long time, he said, "He would have liked the spring here, when the pasture comes in. He used to say Montana smelled like possibility." "Tell me about him in the spring," Emma said. "When it comes, show me the things he liked." James looked at her. "All right," he said. He put the compass in his breast pocket. He kept it there from that day forward. The crack Patterson had warned them about appeared on a Tuesday in early April, and it appeared in a form none of them had anticipated. Emma was in the church hall with the children when Nora Walsh came through the door with a look on her face that Emma had never seen there before. "You need to come," Nora said. "Now, leave the children with me." Emma came. Nora walked fast and didn't explain until they were outside. "There's a man in town," Nora said. "He arrived this morning. His name is Gerald Whitfield." Emma stopped walking. "He says he's your uncle," Nora said. The world did not go silent so much as it went very sharp and bright and close. The way the world goes when something you have not thought about in months suddenly becomes immediately present. "Where?" Emma said. "Patterson's office," Nora said. "He went there first. I don't know what he said. Patterson sent for James, and James is there now, and Emma, I think you need to be in that room." Emma was already moving. She went up the stairs to Patterson's office 2 at a time, and opened the door without knocking, and took in the scene in one sweep. Patterson behind his desk, James standing near the window with his arms crossed, and his face doing the careful neutral that meant he was controlling something that wanted to be much less neutral, and in the chair across from Patterson's desk, Harold Whitfield. Harold looked older than she remembered. Or maybe she looked at him differently now. He was wearing his good coat, and his hat was on his knee, and he had the assembled, reasonable expression she remembered from the night she had told him she was leaving. He looked at her when she came in, and something moved through his face. Relief, she thought, or the performance of relief. "Emma," he said. "Thank God." "Harold," she said. She did not sit down. She stood beside James, and James's hand found her arm briefly. Just a touch, a point of contact, and then he stepped back to give her the room. "What are you doing here?" Emma said. "I came to see that you're all right," Harold said. "It's been 6 months and we've heard nothing." "You've heard nothing because I chose not to write," Emma said. "That was a choice, Harold, a deliberate one." Harold's expression arranged itself into something sorrowful. "Emma, your aunt has been worried sick." "Harold," she kept her voice even. "You didn't come all the way from Ohio because you were worried about me. What do you want?" Patterson cleared his throat quietly. Harold looked at the desk. "I came to discuss the land," he said. There it was. Emma heard James make a very small sound beside her, something that wasn't quite a word. "The 12 acres my parents left me," Emma said. "The taxes on it are in arrears," Harold said. 18 months of taxes. I've been paying them on your behalf out of my own pocket because it's still family land, and I wasn't going to see it seized, but I can't keep doing that indefinitely, and the county is going to take action if—" "How much?" Emma said. Harold named a figure. It was not large. It was not small. It was a figure that would have been impossible for Emma 6 months ago, and that was manageable now with careful planning. and she understood immediately that Harold had known this, had calculated. It had waited for a moment when the amount was large enough to be significant and small enough to seem reasonable. "Show me the receipts," Emma said. Harold blinked. "The receipts," he said. "For the tax payments you made on my behalf," Emma said. "If you've been paying 18 months of taxes, you have receipts. Show them to me." Harold looked at Patterson. Patterson looked at Emma with an expression that was trying hard to remain professional. "I didn't bring them with me," Harold said. "Then you'll bring them," Emma said. "Or you'll have them sent. Patterson will want to see them before any money changes hands." "Emma, this is family." "Patterson," Emma said, still looking at Harold. "Can you contact the county office and find out the current status of the tax account on the Whitfield parcel? 12 acres Ohio registration in my name." "I can do that," Patterson said. Harold's reasonable expression had developed a crack in it. "This isn't necessary," he said. "I came in good faith." "I don't doubt your faith," Emma said. "I want to verify the facts." She sat down finally in the chair beside James, and she looked at her uncle, and she said with the steady voice of someone who has had 6 months to become someone new, "Harold, I am going to find out exactly what the taxes on that land are, and exactly what has or hasn't been paid, and I am going to handle it properly. If you paid what you say you paid, you will be reimbursed. If you didn't, we'll proceed accordingly." She paused. "But I am not signing anything today, and I am not discussing my land without documentation in front of a lawyer. That's how this works now." Harold looked at her for a long moment. She watched him revising her. She could see it happening the way she had watched it happen with Ben Reeves and with Patterson and with Thomas Garrett. Except that with Harold, the revision was unwilling and arrived with an edge. "You've changed," he said, and he did not mean it kindly. "Yes," Emma said. "I have." The interview lasted another 30 minutes, during which Harold said several things that were designed to produce guilt and produced only information, and Patterson took notes, and James sat beside Emma and said almost nothing, but was absolutely present in the way that mattered. When Harold finally left, he was staying at Mrs. Henley's inn, he said, and would be available for further discussion. Patterson closed the door behind him and turned around. "The tax claim may be real," he said, "or it may be partially real. Either way, it's manageable." "I know," Emma said. "What I want to know is whether Henshaw sent for him." Patterson looked at her. James looked at her. "Harold didn't know about the water rights case," Emma said. "He didn't mention it, and he didn't know to use it, which means if Henshaw found him, Henshaw hasn't told him everything yet. But Harold didn't come to Montana for an arrearage that could have been handled by letter." She looked at Patterson. "Find out if there's any connection between Harold Whitfield and Robert Henshaw. Any at all." Patterson looked at her over his glasses. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "how long have you been thinking like a lawyer?" "Since I was 12 years old, and my uncle started looking at my parents' land," Emma said. "Find the connection." She found it herself before Patterson did. She found it that evening, not through any dramatic discovery, but through the simple act of thinking it through at the kitchen table. After supper, working backward from what she knew. The way you worked, backward from a wrong result in arithmetic, to find where the calculation had gone off. Harold had known to come to Patterson's office. Not to the ranch, not to the inn, not to any of the obvious places a man might look for a relative in a small town. He had known where the lawyer's office was, which meant someone had told him, which meant someone who knew Silver Ridge had been in contact with him. "James," she said. "Henshaw's lawyer. What's his name?" "Drummond," James said. "William Drummond. He's based in—" He stopped. "Columbus," Emma said. "Ohio." James looked at her. "That's 4 hours from where Harold lives," Emma said. The silence in the kitchen was very specific. "He didn't come for the taxes," James said. "He came because Drummond told him there was an opportunity," Emma said. "Harold owns the land adjacent to my 12 acres. If I sign the 12 acres over to Harold for back taxes for a nominal amount. For any reason, Harold and Drummond can consolidate the parcels, and there's suddenly a much larger piece of Ohio land that Henshaw has some kind of interest in, which gives him leverage or collateral, or something I haven't figured out yet. She pressed her fingers against her forehead. I don't know all the pieces. But Harold didn't find Patterson's office by accident. James was quiet for a long moment. Then he said very evenly, Henshaw used your uncle to come after you. He used my uncle to come after my land, Emma said. Which is different. Harold doesn't need encouragement to come after my land. He's been trying since my mother died. Emma, James said, that land is yours. I know it is. I mean, he paused. Whatever it takes to protect it. Whatever we need to do. It's yours, and we will not let it go. Emma looked at him across the table. She thought about the girl who had sat at another kitchen table in Ohio 6 months ago and looked at an unsigned document and chosen not to sign it. She thought about how much distance there was between that girl and this moment, and how most of that distance had not been measured in miles. Together, she said. Together, James said. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers, and Emma looked down at his hand and then up at his face, and neither of them said anything else because they didn't need to. Patterson confirmed the Drummond connection 3 days later. William Drummond had maintained a professional correspondence with Harold Whitfield for 4 months, which was 2 months before Henshaw filed the water rights claim. The nature of the correspondence, Patterson could only partially establish legal communications, had protections, but the timing and the parties involved were enough. He's been building this from 2 directions, Patterson said. The water rights claim is the primary assault. Your uncle and the Ohio land is a flanking move. He applies pressure here, and he applies pressure there, and he's hoping one of them makes you crack. He doesn't know us very well, Emma said. No, Patterson said. I don't believe he does. Emma went to see Harold that afternoon. Alone. She had told James she was going, and he had said he would come with her, and she had said no, and he had looked at her for a moment, and then said, all right, which was one of the things she had come to love about James Carter. He had learned when all right was the right answer. Harold was in the inn's small sitting room, and he looked up when she came in with the expression of a man who has been recalculating and has arrived at an uncomfortable number. Emma sat down across from him. I know about Drummond, she said. Harold said nothing. I know he contacted you, Emma said. I know the timing. I know enough, Harold. She looked at I'm going to ask you one question, and I want you to tell me the truth, because we are family, even when we are not kind to each other, and because I think somewhere underneath all of this, you know the difference between right and wrong, even when you choose wrong. She paused. Did you know what Henshaw was trying to do to us? Not the water rights, specifically. Did you know he was using you to come after me? Harold was quiet. He looked down at his hat on his knee. Drummond said it was a business arrangement, he said. He said the land value would increase significantly if the parcels were consolidated. He didn't. Harold stopped. He didn't tell me about any of the rest of it. Emma looked at him. She made a decision about whether she believed him. She believed him. Not entirely. Not without qualification. Harold was not a man who asked questions whose answers might complicate something profitable, but she believed that he hadn't known the full picture, and that believing mattered because it changed what she said next. Harold, she said, go home. He looked up. I will pay the tax arrears if they're real and documented, she said. I will send you the money, and you will send me the receipts, and Patterson will verify everything, and that will be the end of it. The land stays in my name. She held his gaze. And you will not do business with William Drummond or anyone connected to Robert Henshaw. Not now, not later. Because if you do, I will find out, and I will not be sitting here having a civil conversation the next time. Harold looked at her for a long moment. You're serious, he said. I have been serious since the night I left your house, Emma said. You just weren't paying attention. Harold left Silver Ridge on Thursday. The tax receipts arrived by mail 2 weeks later. Patterson reviewed them. 3 of the 18 months had been paid by Harold. The rest were current. Emma sent Harold a money order for the 3 months and a short letter that said nothing except thank you and goodbye, and that was the end of Harold Whitfield. Spring came to Montana, the way. Spring always came, not all at once, but in arguments, cold retreating and returning the ground, thawing and refreezing. And then one morning, Emma walked outside, and the air had changed, and the light had changed, and the ranch, which had been gray and white for 5 months, showed the first green at the edge of the south pasture. She stood on the porch and breathed it. James came out behind her. "There it is," he said. "Is this what Daniel meant?" Emma said. "The possibility." James stood beside her and looked at the south pasture. "Yes," he said, "exactly that." Emma looked at the green coming in at the edge of the field and thought about a boy who could whistle any bird call you could name, and who had loved this land, and who had not lived to see enough springs of it. And she thought it was right to remember him in this moment, rather than not, because the spring was partly his too, in the way that places belong to the people who have loved them. "I want to put in Daniel's garden," she said. "This spring." The kitchen garden he was going to plant. James was quiet. "The seeds on the windowsill," he said. "And more," Emma said. "I've been saving seeds all winter. I want to do it properly." James turned to look at her. She could not always read his face completely. She had learned much of it, but not all of it. But she could read this. She saw something in his face that was grief and gratitude, and something she did not have a clean name for something that required both those things and more, and she held his gaze and let him feel it. "All right," he said. "We'll do it together." The legal case resolution came in May, and it came faster than Patterson had predicted, and the reason it came faster was the reason none of them had anticipated. Martin Briggs. Eleanor's father, and the author of the 18-year-old survey, died in April of a stroke. In his papers, which his daughter was sorting through in the weeks that followed, Eleanor Briggs found a second letter. Eleanor came to Silver Ridge herself to deliver it. She was a composed woman in her early 30s, who shook Emma's hand at the door with the directness of someone who has spent time sorting out what she thinks before she acts on it. "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner," Eleanor said, sitting at the kitchen table with James and Emma and Patterson, who Emma had sent for immediately. "I didn't know about any of this until I found the papers." The letter was from Martin Briggs to Robert Henshaw, written 6 years ago, 2 years after James had bought the land. It was in Briggs's own handwriting, an account of how he had backdated elements of the original survey to show the water source as originating under the adjacent property rather than the Carter parcel. He had done it at Henshaw's request, and the letter specified what he had been paid. The room was very quiet when Patterson finished reading it. "This is fraud," Patterson said. "Yes," Eleanor said. "I'm aware." Emma looked at Eleanor Briggs. "Why are you bringing this to us?" she said. Eleanor looked back at her steadily. "Because it's right," she said. "Because my father did something wrong, and I found the evidence of it, and the question of what to do with it is not actually complicated, even though it would be much more comfortable if it were." She paused. "And because Robert Henshaw used my father's mistake for his own purposes for 6 years, and my father isn't here to answer for it, and I am not going to let Henshaw hide behind him." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," she said. Eleanor nodded. She looked at James. "I know we didn't suit each other," she said. "I hope this goes some way toward a different kind of apology." James looked at her. "You don't owe me an apology for that," he said. "Your father does, and I think you know that. What you're doing right now, that's different." Eleanor nodded again. She finished her coffee, and she left, and the letter stayed on Patterson's desk, and Patterson looked at it for a long time. "This ends the case," Patterson said. "Henshaw's entire claim rests on the Briggs survey. With this letter, his lawyer will withdraw, rather than risk disbarment." He looked at James. "The water rights are yours, cleanly and permanently." James sat back in his chair. Emma watched him absorb it. She saw him take a breath that was different from his usual breath. Something released in it, some weight he had been carrying so long he had stopped noticing it was there. "It's over," he said. "The legal part is over," Patterson said. "I'd keep documenting anything Henshaw does for the next year, just to be safe. But yes, substantively, it's over." James looked at Emma. Emma looked at James. "Told you," she said. He almost smiled. "You did," he said. Patterson had the grace to pretend to be very busy with his papers for the next few moments. "Robert Henshaw left Silver Ridge in June. I didn't announce it, and he didn't explain it. and the story that circulated was that he had interests elsewhere that required his attention, which was the kind of story a man tells when the true story is that he tried to commit fraud in a small town, and the small town found out. He sold the adjacent property to a family from Colorado who turned out to be pleasant neighbors with no interest in water rights disputes, and the fence line that had been a source of trouble for years was repaired and never contested again. Clara Henshaw stayed. This surprised everyone, including Emma. But Clara Henshaw, it turned out, had her own opinions about her husband's conduct that she had been keeping to herself for some years, and she presented herself at the Carter Ranch one morning in July with a jar of preserves and an expression that combined discomfort with determination in about equal measure. Emma answered the door. Clara Henshaw looked at her. "I owe you an apology," Clara said. "More than one." Emma looked at her for a moment. Then she opened the door wider. "Come in," she said. "I'll put the kettle on." James, who was in the kitchen when they came through, looked at Emma with an expression that was asking a fairly significant question. Emma gave him a small nod that meant, "I'll explain later," and set the kettle on, and the three of them sat at the kitchen table, and Clara Henshaw said what she had come to say, which was an apology that was genuine in the uncomfortable way of genuine things, and Emma accepted it in the way she had learned to accept difficult things directly and without drama, and with the intention of actually letting it settle rather than carrying it. After Clara left, James looked at Emma. "You forgave her," he said. "I accepted her apology," Emma said. "Those aren't quite the same thing. She's going to have to show me she means it over time." James considered this. "That's fair," he said. "Most things are," Emma said. The garden went in at the end of April, and by July it was the most alive thing on the ranch. Emma had planted it on the south side of the house where the light was best, and she had put in the beans and the herbs and the stubborn little tomato plant from the windows which had survived all winter with the single-minded energy of something that had decided it was going to exist, regardless of what anyone thought about the odds. She had added squash and potatoes and 2 rows of sweet corn and a bed of sunflowers along the fence, because she had always wanted sunflowers, and there was no practical reason she could think of not to have them. James came out one evening in late July and stood at the garden fence and looked at it. Emma was on her knees pulling weeds, which was approximately endless, and she looked up at him. "Daniel would have added a scarecrow," James said. "An elaborate one, with a hat." Emma looked at the garden. "We could still do that," she said. "Yes," James said. "We could." The scarecrow appeared the following Saturday. It was James who built it. Emma had suggested it, but James had gotten up early and done it before she was out of the house, and when she came outside in the morning, it was standing at the corner of the garden in an old coat and one of James's spare hats, looking out over the squash with enormous dignity. Emma stood on the porch and looked at it for a long moment. She thought about a 9-year-old boy laughing in a photograph. She thought about possibility and springs and bird calls and a compass in a breast pocket. "Good morning, Daniel," she said quietly, just to herself, just to the garden and the warm July air. Then she went to put coffee on. Nora Walsh came by that afternoon with her eldest daughter, a shy 12-year-old named Ruth, who had been attending Emma's lessons for 3 months, and who had recently discovered that she had both the aptitude and the appetite for mathematics that was going to take her well past what Emma could teach her. Nora sat at the table and watched Emma help Ruth through a problem that was pushing the edge of Emma's own knowledge. And when Ruth went outside to look at the garden, Nora said, "You know she's going to need a real school eventually." "I know," Emma said. "There's talk," Nora said carefully, "in town, about whether Silver Ridge is large enough to support a proper schoolhouse. Patterson has been asking around about what it would take, what the county would require." Emma looked at her. "Is he asking because he thinks it's a good idea?" she said. "Or because someone asked him to look into it?" Nora smiled. "Both, I think," she said. "He mentioned your name." Emma was quiet for a moment. "I'm not a certified teacher," she said. "Not yet," Nora said. Emma looked out the window at the garden where Ruth was examining the scarecrow with scientific interest. She thought about what it meant to build something. She thought about the ranch, which had been a survival place when she arrived and was now something different, and she thought about the children who came on Tuesday and Thursday and who had started asking questions she had to work to answer, and she thought about what Nora was actually saying, which was not. Here is a nice idea, but here is the next thing. Tell Patterson I want to talk to him, Emma said. Nora nodded. One more thing, Nora said. She was looking at Emma with a particular expression. Maggie Reeves told me something this morning. Emma waited. She said you're looking peaked, Nora said. Her words. And Maggie Reeves has delivered half the babies in this county. Emma was very still. She said, Tell Maggie Reeves she has a very loud voice. Nora looked at her. Emma looked back. Emma, Nora said quietly. Are you? I don't know yet, Emma said. I think possibly. She looked at the table. I haven't told James. I'm not certain. Nora was quiet for a moment. Are you frightened? She said. Emma considered it honestly. A little, she said. But it's the right kind of frightened. The kind where you're afraid because something matters. Nora reached across the table and put her hand over Emma's. You're going to be wonderful, she said. Emma looked at her hands. She thought about a girl on a train platform with a suitcase and a newspaper clipping, and a fear she could barely name. She thought about all the space between that girl and this table, this kitchen, this garden with a scarecrow in a borrowed hat. She thought about James, who would come in from the south pasture at dusk and sit down at this table and eat supper. And she thought about how she was going to tell him and what his face was going to do, and she felt something so large and warm she couldn't hold the whole shape of it. That evening when James came in, he found Emma standing at the kitchen window, looking out at the garden in the last light. He stopped. Something in the way she was standing made him go still. Emma, he said. She turned around. She looked at him for a moment with her hands at her sides and her face doing something it did not often do, which was nothing deliberate at all, just what it was underneath everything. Sit down, she said. He sat down. She sat across from him, and she took a breath, and she told him. The kitchen was quiet. James looked at her. He looked at her for a long time without saying anything, and Emma watched his face move through something she had never seen on it before. Something that started as surprise and moved through a territory she didn't have a name for, and arrived somewhere that was very quiet and very clear and very certain. He reached across the table. He put both his hands around both of hers. He said, Emma. Just her name. Just that. And Emma Carter, who had arrived terrified on a train platform in Silver Ridge, Montana, with one small suitcase and a newspaper clipping, and a choice she wasn't sure was going to be right. Looked at the man across the table and understood completely and without reservation that it had been. James Carter did not sleep that night. Emma knew because she didn't sleep much either, and in the small hours she could hear him downstairs moving quietly, the way he moved when he was thinking something through that required the whole of him. She lay in the dark and listened, and did not go down, because she had learned that some of James's thinking needed space and silence, and the particular kind of alone that wasn't lonely. In the morning he was at the stove when she came downstairs, and he had made coffee and eggs and biscuits, which was not his usual effort. And when she sat down, he put a plate in front of her, and sat across from her, and looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. It was something close to reverence. "Stop looking at me like that," Emma said. "Like what?" he said. "Like I've done something remarkable," she said. "I haven't done anything yet. I've told you a thing. The doing of it is still ahead." James looked at his coffee. "I know," he said. He stopped. "James." He looked up. "Say what you're thinking," she said. "We don't have time for you to go quiet on me. Not about this." I was quiet for another moment, and then he said, "I didn't think I'd have this. I had decided I wouldn't. I'd made my peace with it, or I thought I had, and then you came, and now—" He set his cup down. "I don't know how to carry something this large." Emma looked at him. "The same way you carry everything else," she said. "One day at a time, doing the next right thing." She reached across the table. "We do it together. That's the only instruction there is." James put his hand over hers. He said, "I'm going to be afraid every day." "Good," Emma said. "That means you understand what it's worth." He looked at her. She squeezed his hand and let go and picked up her fork. Eat your eggs, she said. We have a south fence to check before noon. James looked at her for another moment, that expression still on his face, and then he picked up his fork, and they ate breakfast together in the kitchen, where the curtains caught the morning light, and the summer outside was green and wide, and Emma Carter let herself feel for exactly the length of one ordinary breakfast how far she had come. Then she put her coat on and went to check the fence. August was the fullest month Emma had known since arriving in Montana. The garden was producing faster than she could keep up with. The squash had taken over an entire section. She hadn't intended for it, and the tomato plants, the stubborn survivors from the windows, had become almost aggressively prolific, as if making up for their uncertain winter. She preserved and stored and gave away, and still there was more. And Nora Walsh came twice that week to help and to talk, and Ruth Walsh sat in the kitchen doing mathematics problems while they worked, and the house was full in a way it had never been full before. James watched all of this with the quiet attention he gave to things he was still understanding. One evening he came in and found Emma at the table with 3 children, Ruth and 2 younger ones whose mothers had dropped them off while they helped a neighbor, and all 3 of them were bent over paper, with Emma walking between them. And James stood in the doorway of his own kitchen for a moment, and looked at the scene, and then went quietly to the back of the house to wash up without disturbing them. Later, when the children had gone home and the kitchen was quiet again, he said, "You know what you're doing in there?" "Trying to," Emma said. "No," James said. "You know, you've always known. You just needed somewhere to do it." Emma looked at him. "Patterson says the county would need 2 more families to commit before they'd consider funding a schoolhouse," she said. "Ben Reeves's family would sign on, and the Garretts." "That's 3 with us," James said. Emma looked at him. "Us," she said. "It's on our land," James said, as though this were the most straightforward thing in the world. "We have the east field that isn't producing the way it should. If we put a small building there, I can help build it, and you'd have—" "James," Emma said. He stopped. She looked at him for a long moment. "You're going to give up your east field for a school," she said. "I'm going to give up an underperforming section of the east field," he said, "for a school that my wife will run, which will make it the most useful thing that land has done in 11 years. Emma said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "I love you." She had not said it before. It had been true for some time in the way that real things become true, not dramatically, not in a single moment, but in accumulation, in the daily evidence of a person being exactly who they said they were. And she had felt it and known it, but she had not said it. James went very still. He looked at her across the kitchen table in the August evening, and his face did the thing it did when something arrived that he hadn't prepared himself for, and Emma watched him absorb it and waited. "Emma," he said. "You don't have to say it back right now," she said. "I didn't say it to get something. I said it because it was true and it was time to say it." James looked at the table. Then he looked up. "I have loved you," he said carefully, "since you told me to draw you a map of the ranch on your first night here. I just didn't know the right time." Emma looked at him. "There's no right time," she said. "There's only now." James nodded. "Now then," he said. Emma nodded. "Now," she agreed. They sat in the kitchen for a while longer without saying much else, because some things didn't need words after them, and then they went to bed, and the summer night was warm enough to leave the window open, and Emma fell asleep to the sound of the south pasture in the dark, and she slept well. The schoolhouse proposal went to the county in September. Patterson filed it with signatures from the Carter, Reeves, Garrett, and Walsh families, and a detailed plan that Emma had written over 3 weeks that outlined the curriculum, the schedule, the proposed building, and the expected enrollment. She had written it the way she wrote everything, directly and completely, and without apology for the scope of what she was asking. The county officer who received it wrote back in 2 weeks with questions. Emma answered every one. He wrote back again with more questions. Emma answered those too. James watched this correspondence with genuine amusement. "He's stalling," James said, reading the 3rd letter over her shoulder. "He's not stalling," Emma said. "He's a bureaucrat. He wants everything covered, so he doesn't get blamed if anything goes wrong. Give him what he needs, and he'll approve it." "You sound like you've dealt with bureaucrats before," James said. I've dealt with Harold, Emma said. Same principle. James laughed, the real laugh, the one that still surprised her slightly every time it appeared, and Emma went back to the letter. The county approved the schoolhouse proposal on the 14th of October. Patterson brought the letter out to the ranch himself, which told Emma how pleased he was about it, because Patterson did not generally make house calls. Conditional approval, he said, setting the letter on the kitchen table. Subject to building standards and a certification requirement for the primary instructor. He looked at Emma. Which means you need credentials. I know, Emma said. There's a correspondence program through the state board, Patterson said. I've already written to them, Emma said. The materials arrived last week. Patterson looked at her, then he looked at James. Did you know she'd already done this? He said. I've learned to assume. James said that Emma is always 2 steps ahead. Patterson picked up his coffee. Wise man, he said. The building went up in November, with James leading the construction, and Ben Reeves and Thomas Garrett, and 2 other men from the surrounding ranches doing the work on Saturdays over 5 weekends. Emma organized the labor and kept the supply list and made sure every Saturday ended with enough food to justify the effort. And by the last Saturday of November, there was a small, solid building in the east field with 4 windows and a good stove and 20 feet of chalkboard that James had installed with the same careful precision he brought to everything. Emma stood in the doorway on the last Sunday and looked at it. James stood beside her. Daniel would have had an opinion about the roof pitch, James said. Everyone has opinions about roof pitch, Emma said. Thomas Garrett and Ben Reeves nearly came to blows about it on week 3. I know, James said. I was there. Ben was right, by the way, Emma said. I know that too, James said. I told Thomas so. Emma looked at him. You didn't tell me that, she said. Some things I handle myself, he said. She almost pushed him with her shoulder, which was something she had started doing sometime around June, and which James had initially looked startled by and had now come to accept as a feature of his daily existence. Fair, she said. They stood in the doorway of the small schoolhouse in the cold November morning, and Emma looked at the chalkboard and the rows of small desks that James had built himself over 3 weeks of evenings, and she felt something that was large and warm and completely hers. Next Monday, she said. First day. 11 children signed up, James said. 13, Emma said. The Mackenzie family sent a letter yesterday. 2 more. James looked at her. Where are you going to put 13 children? He said. The same place I put 7 in the church hall, Emma said. Wherever I need to. The first day of school at Carter Field, which was what people started calling it, not because anyone announced that as the name, but because it was on Carter land, and it stuck the way names stick in small communities, arrived with the particular cold brightness of a Montana November morning that Emma had come to love for its clarity. 13 children appeared. 14, actually. Ruth Walsh had brought her younger brother without asking, and he stood behind her at the door with large eyes, and Emma looked at him and said, "Find a seat," and he found one. 14 children ranging from 6 to 13 in a room with a good stove and a chalkboard, and a teacher who had learned everything she knew by insisting on learning it. Emma stood at the front and looked at them. She thought about what to say first. She said, "My name is Mrs. Carter. You're going to learn things in here that surprise you. Some of them will be things you didn't know you wanted to know, and some of them will be things you find difficult, and some days you will not want to come. And I am going to ask you to come anyway, because the days you don't want to come are usually the days you need to be here most." She paused. Now, who can already read? 8 hands went up. Good, Emma said. You're going to help teach the others. She watched several of the older children straighten in their seats with the particular pleasure of being given responsibility. She knew that feeling. She went to work. The twist that December brought was not one Emma had been watching for, which was perhaps why it landed as hard as it did. It came in the form of a letter from Eleanor Briggs. Eleanor had returned to her family's estate after the legal case was settled, and she had written, occasionally, brief correct letters that contained information rather than warmth, though Emma had begun to sense something more underneath them. This letter was different. It arrived thick several pages, and Emma opened it at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning while James was out with the cattle. She read it through once quickly, and then she read it again slowly, and by the time she set it down, she was sitting very still. Eleanor Briggs had gone through her father's papers completely. She had found more than one letter. What she had found working backward through years of her father's correspondence with Henshaw was a detailed record of something that had been done before James ever bought the land. Something that had been done deliberately and with full knowledge of its wrongness. The original water survey. The one from 18 years ago that Henshaw had tried to use had not merely been backdated. It had been commissioned to replace a different survey. An earlier one that had correctly identified the water source as lying under what was now the Carter property. That first survey had been conducted by a surveyor named Aldrich, who had since died, and Martin Briggs had convinced him, paid him the letter suggested, though the amounts were coded to provide a second survey with different conclusions, and the first survey had been buried. All of it. The whole architecture of the fraud. In writing. In Martin Briggs's own handwriting and letters to Henshaw that had apparently been kept as insurance against exactly the kind of falling out that rich men who do business together are always a little afraid of. Emma sat with this for a long time. Then she walked out to the south pasture and found James. She handed him the letter without saying anything. He read it. He read it twice the way she had, and then he held it in his hands and looked at the south pasture for a long moment. 6 years, he said. Henshaw had this for 6 years. The whole time he was making offers and filing claims and sending his wife to... He stopped. More than 6 years, Emma said quietly. He's known since before you bought the land, James. The whole thing was built to make you think you were vulnerable, so you'd sell. James looked at the letter. Emma watched his face. She had seen him angry before, not often, and never without control. But she had seen it, and what was on his face right now was something past anger. It was the specific expression of someone who has discovered that a battle they thought was about one thing was actually about something else entirely, and that the thing it was actually about went back further and cost more than they knew. He couldn't have the land if I bought it free and clear, James said. So he set up the fraud before the sale, made it look like the water rights were uncertain. Made me buy land with a dispute built into it that he could activate any time he wanted leverage. Yes, Emma said. I built 11 years on something he designed to be unstable, James said. James, Emma said. He looked at her. You built 11 years on this land, she said. He didn't design that. You did. He planted a lie underneath it, and we found the lie, and it's done. She held his gaze. The land is yours. The water rights are yours. The 11 years are yours. He doesn't get to own any of it just because he tried. James was quiet for a long time. Then he said, What do we do with this, Patterson? Emma said. Today. Patterson read Eleanor's letter in his office that afternoon, with the focused attention of a man who is simultaneously astonished and professionally gratified. And when he set it down, he said, This is criminal fraud, not civil, criminal. I know, Emma said. Henshaw is in Denver, Patterson said. I received word of his address last month. Can the county reach him? James said. The county and the state with this documentation, Patterson said. Eleanor Briggs's testimony plus her father's letters, plus the original suppressed survey. If Aldrich's family has records, which they may, this is a prosecutable case. He looked at them. But I want to be clear. This will be long. It will be public. Henshaw will fight it because he has money and because the alternative is worse for him. Are you prepared for that? James looked at Emma. Emma looked at James. We've been prepared since November last year, Emma said. Patterson nodded. All right, he said. I'll contact the county prosecutor. They rode home in the early December dark, and Emma was quiet in the way she went quiet when things were settling inside her, and James let the quiet be the way he always did. And about a mile from the ranch, he said, Are you all right? Yes, Emma said. I'm thinking about something. What? Emma looked at the road. I'm thinking about the girl on the train, she said. The one who was afraid of everything and didn't know this place existed and had a newspaper clipping in her pocket and thought she was making the most dangerous decision of her life. James said, And, and I'm thinking she was right, Emma said. It was dangerous, and it was still the right thing. James was quiet. Do you regret any of it? He said. Emma looked at him. Not one day, she said. Not 1 hour. James looked at the road. After a moment he said, Neither do I. They rode the last mile home, in the kind of silence that was not silence at all, but simply everything that didn't need to be said out loud, and Emma felt the baby move for the first time, a flutter, small and certain, the first announcement of a person who didn't yet exist outside of possibility, and she put her hand against her side and felt it again and said nothing. Because some things were too large for the moment they arrived in and needed a little space before they could be spoken. She told James that night. He went so still she thought for a moment she'd alarmed him. Then he put his hand over hers, where it rested on her side, and he held it there, and he didn't say anything for a long time. And when he finally spoke, his voice was different from any version of his voice she had heard before. Hello, he said. Not to Emma. Emma looked at him and felt something so complete and so specific that she understood she would carry the exact quality of this moment for the rest of her life. The Henshaw case moved through the winter and into the following spring, and it was everything Patterson had warned them. It would be long and public and hard, in the particular way that legal proceedings are hard, which is relentlessly and without drama, a grinding accumulation of documents and testimony and waiting. Emma testified in March. She sat in the county courthouse in Silver Ridge and answered questions for 2 hours from the county prosecutor and 1 hour from Henshaw's lawyer, who had traveled from Denver and who tried 3 different approaches to shaking her and succeeded at none of them. And Emma answered every question directly and completely and looked at the man across the room from her. Robert Henshaw in his best coat, with the carefully maintained expression of a man who has not yet accepted that this is over, and she did not look away. James was in the courtroom. He sat in the second row, and he did not take his eyes off her, and Emma knew he was there without looking. The way she knew the weather, and the cattle, and all the things she had learned to know in the past year and a half, and his presence was steady and warm at her back the whole 2 hours. Afterward, in the corridor outside, she stood next to him, and she said, How did I do? You were extraordinary, he said. Patterson's word is better, she said. What did Patterson say? James almost smiled. He said you were the most effective witness he's ever put on the stand, James said, and that you should have been a lawyer. Tell him I'm busy being a teacher, Emma said. James did smile then. Eleanor Briggs testified the following week, and her testimony was quiet and precise and devastating because Eleanor Briggs was a woman who had loved her father and had chosen the truth anyway, and that combination was impossible to argue against. Robert Henshaw's lawyer withdrew from the case in April. Henshaw himself, through a new lawyer who arrived from Denver, looking like a man who had been given bad news, he was expected to deliver gracefully, negotiated a settlement that included a formal legal acknowledgement of the fraud, a significant financial penalty, and a permanent restriction on any future claims against the Carter property. He did not appear in court to hear the settlement entered. Patterson said this was typical. Emma thought it was exactly what it looked like, which was a man who had spent 30 years believing that money and patience could get him anything he wanted, confronting the fact that he had been wrong. She found she did not feel triumphant. She felt tired and relieved and ready to be done with it. She told James this that evening. I thought I'd feel more, she said, when it was finally finished. What do you feel? James said. Quiet, she said. The same quiet as after a storm, when the noise stops and everything is just there. James nodded. That's what finished feels like, he said. I didn't know that either the first time. Emma looked at him. What was the first time, she said. When the land was finally paid for, he said. 11 years ago. I thought I'd feel I don't know, something large, but it was just quiet. He paused. And then I went to work the next morning. Emma looked at her hands. I'm going to go teach school tomorrow, she said. Yes, James said. You are. And the garden needs turning over before May, she said. The south bed especially. I'll start it Saturday, James said. Emma nodded. She looked at the kitchen. The curtains she had hung in her first week. now faded slightly from 2 winters of light. The record books stacked on the shelf she had reorganized. The wooden box with her parents' photographs on the windowsill where it had sat since the first night she arrived. The compass she had hung on the hook beside the door, because James had started keeping it there instead of in his pocket, as if the house itself needed to know where it was going. She looked at all of it. "James," she said. "Yes," he said. "Thank you," she said. "For the advertisement, for meeting me on the platform, for picking up my suitcase." She paused. "For all of it." James looked at her. "Emma," he said, "you saved my cattle and my water rights and my land from fraud, and you taught half the children in Silver Ridge to read, and you walked into a blizzard to find me, and you are going to give me a child." He stopped. "I think the accounting comes out on my side." Emma looked at him. "We're not keeping score," she said. "No," he said. "We're not." The baby arrived in May on a morning that was the best kind of Montana spring morning, clear and cold and full of everything coming back. James sent for the doctor, who arrived in time, and Nora Walsh was there, and Sarah Garrett, who had done this twice, and was steady and good to have in the room. And Emma worked through 6 hours with the focused determination she brought to everything. And at the end of those 6 hours, there was a person in the room who had not been there before. A girl. James was allowed in shortly after, and he stood at the edge of the bed and looked at Emma, and then at the small person in Emma's arms. And his face did the thing it had been doing since July, when Emma first told him, which was the thing she had never seen on a face before, and didn't have a name for because it was entirely its own thing. He sat down on the edge of the bed. Emma held the baby toward him, and he took her with careful hands, and the baby looked at him with the unfocused dark eyes of someone who has just arrived somewhere and hasn't yet decided what to make of it. "Hello," James said for the second time in his life, to someone who hadn't yet been born when he said it first. Emma watched him hold his daughter. She thought about the 2 boys in a photograph, and a compass in a pocket, and seeds on a windowsill, and bird calls in the morning, and a man who had been carrying loneliness for so long. He'd stopped noticing the weight, and she thought about what it meant to give someone back something they had lost the shape of. "What do we call her?" James said. Emma had been thinking about this for weeks. "Margaret Daniel Carter," she said. "Margaret for my mother. Daniel for—" "Yes," James said, before she finished. "Yes." He looked down at the baby who was Margaret Daniel Carter, who would grow up on land with water rights that had been fought for and won, who would learn to read in a schoolhouse her father built in an east field that wasn't producing the way it should, who would grow up knowing that her Uncle Daniel had loved this place, and that there was a scarecrow in the garden wearing his hat. Emma watched James's face. She had come to Montana afraid of everything. She had come without knowing what kindness looked like when it was offered, without strings, without knowing what it felt like to stand on ground that was hers, without knowing what she was capable of when someone finally got out of her way and let her be capable of it. She knew all of those things now. She knew them in the particular way you know things you have lived, rather than learned the way they settle into the bone and stay. Nora Walsh. Leaving that afternoon, stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked back at Emma, who was sitting at the kitchen table with the baby sleeping against her chest and James's hand on her shoulder and the spring light coming through the faded curtains. "Look at this," Nora said quietly, as if she was saying it to herself. Emma looked up. "What?" she said. Nora shook her head. "Nothing," she said. "Only that it's exactly right." It was exactly right. The girl who had arrived terrified on a train platform with one small suitcase and a newspaper clipping and a fear she could barely name had walked into a life she didn't know was waiting for her, and she had built it with her own hands and her own stubborn refusal to be less than what she was, and she had found in the building of it a man who understood that a partner was not someone you protected from the world, but someone you stood beside in it. They had fought for this land and won it. They had fought for each other and found something neither of them had known how to ask for. And on a clear May morning in Silver Ridge, Montana, with a garden full of vegetables and a school in the east field and a compass on the hook by the door and a baby sleeping in the kitchen that had once been the emptiest place Emma had ever seen. Emma Carter looked at the life she had chosen and understood completely and without reservation that the most dangerous decision she had ever made had also been the truest one. She had come here with nothing left to lose. She left that train platform with everything still ahead of her. And everything, it turned out, had